Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and welcome to a compilation video of some of my best full potential videos that I've done in the past. Now the reason why I'm doing this video is effectively to look back on some of my good full potential videos that I have done in preparation for what I am planning to do later, which is effectively give some of these full potential videos reworks. This is either because some characters in this video deserve full-on videos dedicated to themselves, some people that I just got more and more ideas for in order to make their full potential greater and greater, and even some techniques whose audio did get a little bit weird and funky, primarily because of copyright stuff that happened with bad music choices. So I also do want to say thank you to everyone who has supported the Full Potential series so much up to this point. It's one of my better series, and I'm happy a lot of you guys do like it, because it's one where I get to be super creative as well as test my knowledge in terms of Jujutsu Kaisen. However, I'm gonna stop yapping now and let you guys get on to the Full Potential. Hello everybody, Eternal Flame here, and today we are back with the Full Potential series. Yeah, that's right, we are back today to do the Full Potential series, where today we are going to try and advance the entirety of Kyoto High in order to not make them absolute garbage so they aren't going to be memed on. We are just going to mainly be talking about the combatants today, so we are actually doing this a different approach than how I normally do it. The normal way I do my Full Potential series is we specifically target the technique and not actually the person, and we focus on creating the best user of the technique as possible. I don't feel like doing that today because I want to be nice to Kyoto High. Rather than creating a better user of the technique so we can see how good the technique would be and just how trash them they are as people, I want to try improving themselves as sorcerers in order to make the technique as best as possible. However, there's going to be something else special about this video that's going to be very different from how I usually do these types of videos, which is the other sorcerers are going to be allowed to help each other. This is going to impact some sorcerers dramatically, while others are just going to get more minor impacts, but all of them are going to get impacts, which are going to make a lot of sense the more and more I get into this video. Basically, if you want an in-lore explanation, Utahime felt like their performance back during the Goodwill Festival was embarrassing, and also just consider this a timeline where Mekamaru got away to tell Gojo, and Gojo was able to arrive on time before Mahito and Kinjaku could kill him, and those two are dead. So basically the Cohen Games never happened in this timeline. Now, the order I'm planning to cover these sorcerers are going to go as followed. First, I'm going to go with Miwa, then Momo, then Kamo, then Todo, then Mai, then Mekamaru, and then finally I'm going to go into how teamwork affects all of this and how it's going to help advancing all of them. There are also going to be chapters in the video if you want to skip over certain characters. However, let's get started. Now up first is Miwa, and I'm not going to waste too much time on Miwa, mainly because we already know what a full potential Miwa should be, and that's literally just Kusakabe. In other words, we just need to make Miwa into a Kusakabe while keeping a good mentality rather than having Kusakabe's mentality, and you get a pretty good sorcerer. The main reason why I think keeping a good mentality is important is mainly because of the fact that Kusakabe has a lot of self-doubt about himself, and he just doesn't think of himself as that strong. So yeah, just have Miwa become Kusakabe. Now this will be very, very hard to achieve, but if you are able to pay Ui and Mei enough, which I think should be possible considering the combined funds of Mekamaru and Mekamaru's ability to hack, as well as Kamo and his resources should be able to find a way to pay Mei enough. And because we already know where Kusakabe is, this would put Miwa at grade 1 level if she can achieve the level of Kusakabe. Of course, it's not entirely sure if she can or not, but if she does somehow manage to achieve it, that would be her full potential, which for the sake of this video, we are assuming that she can achieve it, mainly because we're being generous to Kyoto High. Now up next for Momo, what should we have Momo work on in order to advance her abilities? Well, number one, let's go over what her actual curse technique is, because I'm pretty sure a bunch of people did forget what her curse technique was. Even I forgot, and I actually had to Google it before this video. Her technique allows her to telepathically control items. She mainly uses it to control a broom. She has also been shown the ability to carry other people on her broom as well, and she can carry her own weight on the broom and continue to use that to fly. Finally, she's also capable of launching out wind slashes and wind gusts out from her broom. It is also somewhat implied that Momo has to take on the weight of the objects herself, however that's not fully certain yet. So how would we improve Momo? Well, first I think it's pretty obvious that we're going to need to improve the amount of curse energy they have, their refinement, as well as their ability to carry things. The easiest way to help with their refinement is to get them to land a Black Flash. Of course, nobody can land a Black Flash at will, but trying to train to at least be able to unlock the Black Flash ability is still going to help nonetheless. With that being said, I doubt that Momo is actually going to be able to land the Black Flash, if I'm going to be honest. However, them improving on their physical capabilities as well as their curse energy will be essential. Now up next, we're going to alter the tools that Momo carries with her, mainly because, as you guys can tell, just carrying around a broom that you fly on is not good for combat. Now yes, I do know Momo's entire main purpose is just being surveillance and helping people out in order to make sure that they are aware of what situation they're going to get into, but it would be better for Momo to have more things in order for her to serve as better supports. Now, we don't know for sure if Momo is able to manipulate several items, however, I am going to say that she is, mainly because we've already seen people who are capable of manipulating several items and sending them on different paths. So look at Kamo no Rotoshi, who's able to send several arrows in different directions, for example. Now, of course, I don't think Momo can manipulate tens or even hundreds of objects at once, but even a few objects is going to help her severely in comparison to just having one object, which is a broom. For example, you could have Momo carrying around several stones in order to manipulate that and launch out more attacks at opponents. That would also be able to launch out more wind scythes out from each of the stones. Like, imagine Momo just having a large amount of stones floating up in the air and they all are launching wind scythes at an opponent. You could also do this potentially with arrows, or you could do this with blades. You can do this with a bunch of weapons in order to give Momo a lot more versatility and just constantly bombard opponents with attacks from the air and from close range as well. You also could go full Gremmy and give Momo a bunch of guns going guns ablazing and manipulating them through tool manipulation to fire. Rather than just them having one gun, you can have several guns. You also have the advantage of the fact that bullets are pretty effective against sorcerers, mainly because of the fact that they don't have curse energy infused into them. Now, it won't be really good against people that are high level, like grade 1s and above, but it will still be very useful against sorcerers and curses. Of course, for curses you need to infuse curse energy into the bullets, but nonetheless it would still be pretty effective. However, we're not done yet. This is when we're going to get into a specific set of tools and a binding vow that I have in mind for Momo, where for Momo I want her to start infusing curse energy into several arrows. However, these arrows have a very unique purpose, as these arrows are not mainly made to be used in combat other than for one-time move things, as it's going to have a very similar binding vow to the binding vow Mei has placed on her crows, where once these arrows land on an opponent, they will immediately get destroyed in order to get a massive buff to their power when they land on somebody. This is all mainly to help with Momo's battle power and making her that much more effective of a combatant. Now, yes, she could add cursed tools to her arsenal, but I legit don't know if she actually could afford to get the cursed tools that would actually be good. Like, they could get pre-made cursed tools, but I don't think she could afford to get any that is actually worthwhile. I think with all of this, we can get Momo to the pretty high tiers of semi-grade 1. I don't think that she's going to surpass semi-grade 1, mainly because there are limits to what she can really do, but I do think we can get her all the way up to semi-grade 1. However, that's not too bad considering Momo's main purpose is literally to be support. Now, up next is Kamo no Rotoshi, and this is going to be one of the shorter sections of the video. Not because I don't have a lot to talk about with blood manipulation, but that's because I have kind of already made two videos going over the full potential of blood manipulation. One going over what a blood manipulation domain would be like, and another going over what the full potential of blood manipulation would be like in the very specific context of a human using it and not death painting using it. So I'm going to just go over a very quick summary of everything that I said in that video, but I'm also going to include something else, which is an idea I got from you guys in the comments because one of you people are just straight up a monster. You know who you are when I get to your idea. However, if you want a more detailed explanation on the ability itself, go check out the original video of what is the full potential of blood manipulation. So of course, starting out, we need to get Kamo access to reverse curse technique. While it won't be as good as converting your own curse energy into blood, you'll need to use RCT instead. It'll be better than Kamo dying out from blood loss. Up next, instead of carrying blood bags around, Kamo is going to end up creating several Shikigami in order to store his blood in. Basically, consider this Kamo taking inspiration after fighting Megumi and deciding, you know what, Megumi has these Shikigami, I'm going to try and make my own Shikigami since they are clearly so useful for him, and it's what gave him the advantage in our fight. This also ends up helping to counter one of the main weaknesses of blood manipulation, being its weakness to water, mainly because if it's stuck inside of a Shikigami, water won't be able to touch it as easily. Then use the Shikigami as shells in order to prepare techniques inside of the Shikigami. Also a reminder, because a lot of people don't know this, it is possible for anybody to create a Shikigami. Gojo stated that a while back to Yuji, back when Yuji was figuring out about curse energy. Sure, it's simple Shikigami, but Kamo has access to a curse technique, which is going to make them that much better. And I have a couple Shikigami ideas in mind. One Shikigami is going to be just a pretty large Shikigami that's only purpose is going to be carrying blood for Kamo to use. Another Shikigami is going to have piercing blood infused into it where it can only fire out piercing bloods, which I imagine basically being a dragonfly. And because of that, it's going to have a binding vow on top of it, which is going to end up amping the piercing blood since that's the only technique it can use. And then a final Shikigami in the background, which main purpose is going to be charging up a very powerful attacks, while Kamo as well as his Dragonfly Shikigami continue to fight and put pressure on the main opponent from the front. For Kamo's technique of slicing exorcism, we're going to advance it by taking advantage of Choso's usage of it, where it's also just going to be thin lines of blood to slice at people while at the same time still using the entire shuriken that Kamo makes, mainly because both applications are pretty good to use. Furthermore, you can also include occasional binding vows in order to make piercing blood that much stronger by amping up the amount of time it needs to charge up, because it does need some time to charge in order to compress the blood to be fired out properly. Up next is Flowing Red Scale Stack, where the way that I would amp up Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack is by amping up the property that allows them to heat up their body. I wouldn't constantly heat up their body, but I would make it so Kamo for moments of time massively heats up their body in order to do burning damage as well on top of the physical damage that they do whenever they touch opponents. We see that Kamo was able to amp up the heat of their body because that's how Choso was able to melt through Arame's ice. Now of course it's going to have high risk as a technique, but that's just going to make the technique that much better because we can turn that into binding vows. Now of course there is the possibility that Kamo might have access to the ability to manipulate blood in other people, but I don't think that's too likely. I think they have to be dead people at best, assuming he can even manipulate blood in other people, but I think it is potentially possible. However, what I think is even more interesting is the domain expansion we are going to give Kamo, as I think if any character is going to be fitting of having a domain expansion, it's going to be one of the inheritors of the big three families, being Kamo himself. And I think one of the most fitting domain expansions for Kamo Noritoshi to have access to is a sure hit that allows him to manipulate the blood in other people and force them to stand still, basically on a full-on Katara type beat from Avatar, and then start to go crazy on them with techniques. However, now I'm going to go into one of the techniques that you guys came up with because y'all are downright monsters, and the technique that you guys came up with was for Kamo to go to the hospital and find infected blood. Mainly because if Kamo can find infected or diseased blood and use that as attacks, that's just going to make Kamo that much more dangerous and that much more of a menace for most people to fight, mainly because 90% of the verse can't heal poisons. I want y'all to remember, poisons are considered a higher level of RCT than the standard level of RCT. Ultimately, at the end, I would consider this Kamo to be on par with Choso. The domain expansion would put him a tier above Choso, so he should likely be in the high-end grade 1 terms of tier, and that would also be his ranking because I don't see him soloing a nation, but he's still going to be insanely strong nonetheless. However, if the two were to fight, unfortunately, I still see Choso ultimately winning, mainly because Kamo shouldn't have immunity to Choso's poison, while at the same time, Choso should be fine against Kamo's poison that he is going to have access to through his blood. Of course, that is excluding the possibility of Kamo using his domain. If Kamo were to use his domain, I do think he'd win. Also, before we go over to Toto, if you like full potential videos like this, we got a lot more on the channel, and it would help a lot if you just click that little subscribe button down below. Anyways, we're gonna get into Toto now. Aoi Toto, the man with over 500,000 IQ, an absolute genius who already uses his curse technique extremely well. However, there are probably some ways we can advance his curse technique. Unlike the others, we don't really need to advance Toto's physical stats, mainly because Toto's already at a really good position in terms of physicals. Like at most, all we need to do is teach Toto RCT and that will significantly help Toto, but other than that, he is really good in terms of combat as a physical combatant. However, now we're going to focus on Toto's technique and how to make Toto's technique significantly better. Up first, we're going to get some inspiration from a Naruto character known as Minato, where we're going to have Toto start to carry around a bunch of objects to swap around with him. Now, I'm not going to say kunai, but I am going to say either rocks in order to make it so they're easier to displace, that just have a bunch of curse energy infused into them, rather than him having to pick up random things on the road, or it could just be things like daggers in order to teleport people into them. One of the biggest issues that exist with Aoi Toto is the fact that he doesn't really have much to swap with in normal fights, depending on who he's fighting against. So if Toto can carry around a bunch of things to swap with, this will end up significantly helping him, mainly because it will become much harder to predict him. Furthermore, it can also end up painting the image that he can only swap with those things that he brought in people's curse energy and not people's attacks. This also will be significant to help with the other thing that we're going to grant Toto, which is the Vibra Slap. We're just going to say that Toto's going to infuse curse energy and basically make the Vibra Slap as part of himself by duct taping it to his hand. And some of you guys might be wondering, why would that work? And I'm just saying, if Toto can attach the Vibra Slap to the nub on his hand and that be counted as his hand, then he can duct tape it to his hand and still be counted as his hand. This also makes Toto having a bunch of items that he carries around with him to swap with that much more significant, because he will have the Vibra Slap that allows him to do 50 swaps per second, and now he can just throw around a bunch of items and make it look like he is disappearing. In a similar tactic to what he did with Yuji to make it look like Yuji had a bunch of shadow clones, he can do that himself now with a bunch of random items that he carries around with him that is cursed energy infused into it. You can even have Toto carry around swords and throw the swords up into the air and jump at one of them before clapping, causing someone else to get impaled through a sword. Like, the more items that Toto carries around with him, the better, because Toto can become straight up devious if he teleports people into those items. We also know this is very in character for Toto to do, considering Toto literally clapped and made Hanami swap places with him and get impaled by their own attack. Now, I'm not going to give Toto a domain expansion, mainly because I have absolutely no idea what Toto's domain expansion would even do and how to make that work. However, I do have a way that might actually make Toto's technique significantly more broken. However, I'm not fully sure if this is actually possible. Now, up first, I do want to establish that the power of the person Toto is swapping with does not matter at all. After all, there are people Toto has swapped with that are significantly stronger than him, mainly because we know Toto is capable of swapping with Sukuna, whose Sukuna is much more powerful than Toto. So that is something very, very important to establish with what I'm about to say. Now you might be wondering, how am I going to make Toto's technique so much more broken? And it's quite simple really. Toto has to target curse energy that he swaps with. Why not just target only half of the curse energy that he can sense rather than the full thing? So basically, here's my thing that I want to suggest. Have Toto, instead of clapping and swapping the full object, have him only clap and swap places with like half of a person. This would have the capability of one-shotting most people. Now, I do think this would have a power requirement to it, mainly because it is forcefully separating parts of the body from another person just off their curse energy alone, so Toto would probably have to be stronger than them, but at the same time, I'm not too sure, mainly because of the world's cutting slash. Because all the world cutting slash is doing is just targeting something else, which is targeting everything in existence, and that's why it's able to cut through gojo. So I believe you could make an argument that this application of Toto's technique would just follow under that same line. Of course, if you don't think it's possible, or if you think that it would require a power argument to it, then I'm fine with that. But at the same time, we are going over what the full potential of Toto could be. So ultimately, this Toto would be much stronger than his canon counterpart because he carries around a bunch of things to swap with, and if this application ends up being true, then Toto is easily special grade level, mainly because if he can do this to 50 times a second to random people, he is taking over a nation no problem, but that only depends on if this technique and version of the technique is even possible, which I'm kind of not certain about. So if it is possible, Toto is certainly on the special grade rank, but if it's not possible, Toto's probably just a bit stronger than he is in canon. Now, I do admit I wish I could have made this section longer, but Toto is one of the few people who really use their technique to their pinnacle, so it's really hard to think on better ways to use Toto's technique that Toto hasn't already thought of himself. Now, up next is going to be my Zenin, who actually is the main reason why I'm even making this video to begin with, because this part of the video is sponsored by someone else's super chat who donated $5 for me to specifically talk about my Zenin and her full potential, so we are going to go crazy with how far we can pull Mai. Now, up first, I do need to establish this. Yorozu is not Mai's full potential. While Yorozu might be the full potential in terms of physicality, output, all that good jazz, that's what they are the full potential in. They are not the full potential in terms of creation abilities and what they can create, as because of one thing needs to be established, the difference between Mai and Yorozu, which is the eras they were born in. Now, the main reason why I believe the eras they're born in is so important is because of one tool that Mai has access to that is stronger than any tool Yorozu has access to that is going to really help her creation ability. And that tool is the internet. Now, some of you guys might think I'm memeing right now, but I'm really not, because I want y'all to remember something. Yorozu's from over 1,000 years ago. They did not have the internet, they did not have catalogs of information like they do now, and basically all the information that Yorozu used in order to make her bug armor, I guarantee you Mai can just Google in like an hour, 2 hours, and she'd get it done. The main reason why I think this is so important to establish is because Yorozu had much more limited amount of information, and she still managed to get incredibly far, down to the point where several people consider her top 10. So, we're now giving someone who has much more access to information than Yorozu does a much bigger kit because they have easier access to information. So I hope y'all understand why I'm saying Yorozu's creation abilities that she has shown off is not the peak of the verse or anywhere close to that. Mai could potentially go much greater than Yorozu, and I'm going to explain how this is going to affect her entire capabilities. Now, there is also something else that needs to be important as well. The reason why Maki could not get stronger at all was because Mai did not want to get stronger. She never trained. In this, we're altering Mai's mentality a bit to make her need to train more. Basically, we're just going to change Mai's mentality because while she doesn't want to be involved in the life of a Jujutsu sorcerer, she is aware of cursed spirits, and the best way for her to have a normal life is for her to get strong enough to actually earn that normal life. This also ends up accidentally helping Maki, funnily enough, but that's not important. The main thing that is important for this is the fact that Mai is not going to be limited in her training because Maki also is going to not be limited in her training as well because Maki is going to keep training. And now there is something else important to note, which is the limitations that Mai herself said that she was only capable of. She can't make objects that are too big, and she can't make complex things. Now, I think both of these limits are more so limits on the fact that Mai never trained, and that was all she could make on her final death or her current skill allowed her to make. Mainly because she never trained seriously, which is what we're going to change in this in order to make her have wider reserves of curse energy to make her that much stronger. However, up first we are going to apply something we learned from Yorozu to Mai Zenin. Yorozu is capable of creating an armor that carries several traits from bugs and applies them to a human body. The reason why she mainly targeted insects was because of how energy efficient insects actually are, so she decided to copy several traits from insects from the fact that several insects exist that are able to carry several hundreds of their own strength, 2 insects capable of flying overseas in a few goes, 2 several insects that would fly much faster than their body would look like they're capable of flying. And then after taking the systems from insects, she directly applies it to an armor that amplifies her human traits to have those same functions, which we are going to take advantage of, starting with an insect that I find very interesting, known as the diabolical ironclad beetle. And that is mainly to help with her durability. This is mainly because the ironclad beetle is capable of taking 39,000 times its average body weight. So if we put that on Mai Zenin and enhance that with curse energy to make it even more powerful, then yeah, you're going to get something that's incredibly durable and very hard to break through as an armor set. After that, in order to help with Mai's speed, we're going to give Mai the power of the Australian tiger beetle and add that to her armor set that she's going to craft. And for those of you wondering why we're going to give her this instead of something like a cheetah, for example, the Australian tiger beetle is capable of moving 171 times its body length per second. Now some of you guys might be thinking that these bug insect traits shouldn't apply to Mai because Mai is the size of a human. Normally I would agree with you if it wasn't for the fact that this is literally how Yorozu's armor works. Yorozu's armor applies the bug insect traits to herself in order to amplify her strength, speed, and durability by that same amount that bugs do it to themselves, and now we're going to do that with Mai Zenin. However, like I said, Mai has the advantage of being able to get this information near immediately. Like, googling these 2 insects took me a couple minutes in order to do that, in order to add that to Mai's armor set, and there is still much more we can do with that because she's going to apply a lot more insect traits to her armor that she's going to craft. For example, we're going to give Mai Zenin access to Spider Silk as well, which Spider Silk is 5 times the tensile strength as steel, which is going to be much more useful for someone of Mai Zenin's size because Mai is a human in terms of size. So now we're going to give her that as attacks and ways to hold people down. Also, we're going to go full Spider-Man and give Mai Zenin the ability to climb walls and stick to walls as well. Speaking on the topic of spiders though, we're going to also give her access to the venom of the brown recluse spider, which is by far and away one of the most toxic, dangerous venoms that currently exist. I know there are other dangerous venoms, but this is just the immediate one that I can find, and its venom is so deadly that it's going to require immediate attention at least sometimes, which of course for some sorcerers, considering most of them can't actually heal poisons, is going to be very deadly, especially because Mai can heavily increase the size of the venom as well. However, who's to say we need to stop at insects, because there are a lot more deadly things that exist in the world that if Mai can figure out how to recreate the systems and add to her armor, it will make them that much more deadly. For example, you can add the poison from the Deathstalker as well, one of the most deadliest scorpions that exist in the world with one of the most deadliest venoms. Now, I'm not going to go across every single animal that I really want to add, mainly because I know I can't find them all, which is why I want to see what you guys think in the comment section down below on what we can add to this armor to make it more and more broken, because that is the thing I want to push home. With Mai Zenin and the creation technique, the sky is the limit. Whatever you can find can potentially be created with enough time. Now, yes, she says that her limit is that she can only create simple things, but at the same time, based on everything we see, it's more so a skill limit because of Yorozu rather than it actually being just an outright limit on her technique and what it is capable of. Which is also supported by the narrator text as well, saying that it's more so Mai Zenin not having a lot of curse energy rather than it actually being a problem on terms of her actual ability to create. Furthermore, we can also copy Yorozu's liquid metal plan, however we can go a step further with that. Why not create liquid metal that is coated in poison so that whenever you touch the liquid metal, it ends up poisoning you? If that's too much for you, you can also just create poisonous gas or several types of gases that most sorcerers aren't going to be prepared to fight. After all, most sorcerers, like I have repeated in this video several times over, do not have an immunity to poison. That is a high level of RCT that most sorcerers just don't have access to. While it's more useful against sorcerers than curses, it's still going to be rather useful against them too. However, even now, we're not even going as far as we possibly can. So let's step into the realm of science and technology for a minute, allowing Mai to push herself even further. Now, this definitely would take a lot of time, but I do think it is possible with time. And if we do that, what's to stop Mai Zenin from becoming a full-on war machine and adding that to her arsenal? Imagine herself giving herself jet boosters in order to help what's already going to be an amazing level of speed that she is going to have access to, or grenade launchers or bullets directly created on the armor itself. or even giving her heat-seeking missiles, making some weird combination of bug armor fused in with several of a man's greatest technology, a fusion of nature and man, making this perfect weapon for Mai to have access to. And the craziest part about all of this is it wouldn't disappear upon being created because of how Mai's technique works. When something is created, it doesn't disappear, so it would just take time and effort to add all of this together to eventually create the perfect weapon for her to use. Now, this does result in probably a bunch of prototypes being made as well. However, that's going to be important for the teamwork section of this, so we're going to leave that there, but keep that in mind, there are going to be a bunch of prototypes too. However, mainly because they're not going to be working alone, I also can see Mai having an easier time working with this because they're going to have access to the genius that is Mechamaru. And now I'm going to attempt to push Mai's technique even further into the limits beyond what I've already done. And this is going to be probably the craziest thing I'm going to do for Mai Zeni, but I want y'all to remember something about Yorozu. Yorozu, upon being pushed heavily enough to do so, was capable of creating an impossible concept, that being a perfect sphere, because perfect spheres just straight up don't make sense and wouldn't work in real life. So what if Mai figured out how to recreate the process of making nukes? Now, of course, I don't think she would ever actually use this ability. However, what if she just had in her arsenal the ability to recreate nukes? Which I do think is something possible with enough time and studying for her to figure out how to recreate a nuke. It would definitely take a lot of time, but I do think she could eventually figure it out. However, that's going to be the end of where I'm going to reach for Mai and Mai's full potential. However, unlike most characters where I'm pretty confident I have thought of a lot of ways to push them, I think I've only scratched the barrel of what's capable of Mai's technique, mainly because Mai has one of the most broken techniques in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. With enough information, enough curse energy control, and enough studying, it can really be pushed to its limits. But it is definitely a cursing that is only going to get stronger and stronger the more and more time that passes, mainly because with more and more time we're just going to discover more and more things to make it even more insane, which is why I only scratched the surface of this, if that. However, ultimately at the end of this, I do think Mai would be given the rank of special grade, mainly because I think y'all can tell just based on the amount we have given Mai and those destructive abilities, if she has access to all of this, yeah, no country is standing a chance against her. And now we're going to move on to Mechamaru. Now Mechamaru is also going to have a rather short section. Not because I don't have a lot of ideas for Mechamaru, but a bunch of the ideas I already have for Mechamaru were already done in one of Broken Ronin's video of the full potential of Mechamaru where he did it, and I don't really want to copy all of the ideas that he made, so I'm just going to link you guys his video rather than regurgitating his ideas. However, to summarize those very quickly, one idea he had was basically for him to turn into Iron Man and wear one of the Mechamaru suits as his own, while fighting alongside his own Mechamaru suits. He would also end up carrying several Mechamarus that are just the normal Mechamarus with no special abilities, as well as several of the normal Mechamarus that carry the actual special abilities that they have access to normally. Finally, they would also wield the Ultimate Mechamaru suit. However, there's something that I think you can do even more for Mechamaru, which is instead of going bigger, you can go smaller. And what I mean by that is quite simple. Imagine tens to hundreds of Mechamarus that are really small, like the size of insects that are each carrying small little bombs or small little lasers, and you have them fly at opponents in order to make them explode. Sure, the damage isn't going to be major, but enough of these are going to end up overwhelming people. On that note, I also ended up getting some inspiration from Helldivers and the Hulk units from the Automatons, and we're just effectively going to give Mechamaru a couple of those. Mainly because I think they would be really good tanky support for whoever is fighting alongside Mechamaru. Mechamaru would end up being a really good support type sorcerer. Now I do also think at the end of this Mechamaru would more than likely end up being special grade as well. This is mainly because Mechamaru pretty easily can take over a country, mainly because he can make an army himself, and if Geto can be counted as special grade because he can make an army by absorbing enough cursed spirits, Mechamaru can be counted as special grade for that same reason. There are also some other drone ideas I have in mind as well. For example, normal Mechamarus who carry bombs inside of them that just fly at opponents and explode, and those types of Mechamarus. A bunch of Mechamarus just carrying other standard weapons rather than having curse energy infused weapons, which is mainly to be used against other sorcerers rather than curses. However, you could still infuse a little bit of curse energy into them in order to make them suitable against curses and actually able to properly put them down, because we know you can imbue items with curse energy. However, that's all the ideas I have for Mechamaru, at least Mechamaru on his own. However, this is where we're going to enter into the teamwork section and why teamwork is so important for Kyoto High in particular. Up first, I'm going to talk about the first work of teamwork I foreshadowed a little bit, which is going to be between Mechamaru and Mai Zenin. Now, I want you to remember something I said about Mai's armor, which is the fact that Mai's armor is going to have a lot of prototypes and backup husks. Well, those husks aren't going to be standing around being wasted and doing nothing. No, they're going to be given to Mechamaru in order for Mechamaru to create his own drones. Now, I want y'all to imagine this. Mai Zenin's armor that she had created custom with that much amount of power being aided by Mechamaru's science genius and being controlled by Mechamaru. Or to put it even better, a better version of Yorozu's armor being controlled by Mechamaru with the cursed energy cannons being added into that as well. This would probably just become the main Mechamaru body as well once Mechamaru figures out how to fit in his electronics like an animatronic from Five Nights at Freddy's, but once he does, oh boy, this is going to become a monster to fight against, and there are likely going to be several of these things lying around that Mechamaru can upgrade and have fun with. Also, if you think Mai creating her own guns and adding that to the suit was too much, then Mechamaru can just create the guns and add it to the suit for her instead. Now, it wouldn't allow her to create it on the spot, but it would still be pretty useful for her to have, as that would allow her to skip that step. Up next for the teamwork section of things, we're going to go with Mechamaru and Todo. Mechamaru can very easily create several bombs for Todo to carry around with him, so when he claps he can swap places with the bombs and make somebody instantly get hit by the bombs. If we assume that Mai is also capable of creating bombs, then she can do the exact same thing, making Todo's swaps that much more deadly, especially because they have curse energy infused into them and cause shrapnel that will allow much more things for Todo to swap with as well. Mechamaru can also create suits for all people in Kyoto High in order to amp up their physical stats and abilities more. Now, of course, for some of these people, it will be a much more minor buff in comparison for others, like Miwa will be a major buff, but Todo, it would be a minor buff. However, it would still be a buff nonetheless and still be pretty helpful. This is especially the case for Momo, considering Momo's still going to be the weakest one of this entire team, so her having as much of a buff from Mechamaru's armor just being around her will significantly help her. Furthermore, they could also make it so Mechamaru's armor allows her to fly, rather than her needing to use a broomstick, which will allow her to conserve some of her cursed energy and direct it mainly to fighting. Furthermore, you could also potentially give Momo some canisters that are containing either Simple Domain or several Ultimate Mechamaru cannons that would be able to be fired from the heavens as support from Momo directly. Mechamaru could also potentially end up creating lightning gauntlets for Kamo. As a result of that, it would allow him to send lightning through his blood, doing shock damage on top of that because blood is an amazing conductor. Now, while there are definitely other team ways of fighting that I can think of, this is mainly the main things that I can think of in order to help each other's kits individually just from extra items from support. However, the most interesting thing I want to say now is where I think I would rank each of these people based on their new full potential states from weakest to strongest. And the order would go Momo at the weakest, then Miwa is up next, after that would be Kamo no Horitoshi, after Kamo would be Mechamaru, then after Mechamaru would be a tie between Mai and Todo. Now, if you do think Todo is capable of swapping only half of a person rather than the full person, Todo would be above Mai. However, if you don't think that is the case, I would put Todo below Mechamaru. But still, I think we did pretty well, considering we were able to upgrade 3 of the people to special grades, and the others to really high-end grade 1s other than Momo, who's a semi-grade 1, but we still did pretty well. So we're going to cover all the characters from Jujutsu High and amp them up to their full potential, as well as have an end section of this video where we're going to go over how they can end up helping each other. Now, for this specific video, we're not going to change anything about Maki, mainly because all I can really say for Maki is just make her physically stronger and give her more curse tools, which is going to be saved more so for the teamwork section rather than just Maki alone, so yeah. However, in place of Maki, we're going to add Junpei to Jujutsu High, as I really want to do a full potential of Junpei type video, so might as well add him into Jujutsu High, mainly because that's where his full potential would really shine. Finally, I will also be including Hakari and Kirara in this as well, mainly because even though they're expelled, I think they still should be counted as Tokyo High. After all, they are Gojo students. So without further ado, let's get straight into this, starting out with Inumaki. Now, unfortunately, there isn't really much that can be done for Inumaki. Like, the best things that we can really do is work on his base form, work on making him physically stronger, give him things like Simple Domain, as well as RCT so he can handle using his curse technique better. But the thing is, Inumaki's curse technique doesn't really have that many ways to improve it, at least in Inumaki's case, mainly because Inumaki is already a really good user of the technique. Like, we can add more words to Inumaki's dictionary, but it's not really going to alter the technique itself, so there aren't really that many ways we can use it. However, this would ultimately result in Inumaki, in my opinion, at least being a grade 1 ranked sorcerer, or grade 1 in terms of level. However, I could see a very easy argument that he would actually qualify as a special grade sorcerer in terms of rank and not actual level. Mainly because with enough time in RCT, if he were to use his curse technique, he would be able to overthrow a nation eventually. And I'm just saying, if Geto can be counted as special grade because he can collect an army of cursed spirits, this same logic should be able to apply for Inumaki as well. So I would put Inumaki's combat level around the level of a grade 1 sorcerer, probably like the mid-end, somewhere like Nanami level. However, I would put his actual level as a rank itself as special grade, because in my opinion, he does have the special grade potential to take over a nation if he has access to RCT. And the stuffed animal is in the same boat, because there's not really much you can do for that thing. So yeah, Panish remains the same level of strength, maybe add Simple Domain to him, maybe, I don't know. So yeah, that's the end of that. And now we're going to get into Junpei and how I would advance Junpei. Unfortunately, there is not much that we actually know about Junpei's technique and how it works. All we do know is he's able to produce a jellyfish-like Shikigami that can produce a poison that is effective on normal people. However, it doesn't really seem potent enough to kill normal people, but at the same time, it should also be noted Junpei literally just awoke in the technique, so it might have even more potential than that, so it could grow with time, something Mahito himself straight up says about Junpei's technique, about how his Shikigami will grow with him. So we're going to make a lot of assumption work, but the safest assumption I think we can make is making the Shikigami itself eventually get more curse energy, getting bigger, giving it more tentacles while making it mainly work to defend and attack with Junpei. Also, I would recommend for Junpei to try and create more Shikigami like Moondregs, but that being much smaller Shikigami to overwhelm people and make it so even one of the poisons can land. After all, most people can't heal poisons, and the more options and chances you have to poison someone, the more and more useful it would be. Power doesn't really matter too much, mainly because if they can just manage to land one bit of poison on you, well, it's going to be good for you, but the more poison, the better. Finally, if I was Junpei, I would try and figure out a way to apply the poisonous trait to himself as well, whether it's through him just figuring out how he made it with the Shikigami and figuring out how to turn it into a cursed technique, or literally figuring out how to make Moondrag his armor and how to help him in hand-to-hand combat. However, I don't really want to enter too much into the realm of fanfiction, mainly because we don't know that much about how Junpei's technique actually works, so I have to make a bunch of assumptions for it. Ultimately though, I do see Junpei being somewhere around the semi-grade 1 to grade 1 levels at his full potential, assuming everything goes absolutely well for him and that he's capable of landing a Black Flash. If not, I think he'd be stuck between semi-grade 1 and grade 2 levels. Now, the next sorcerer we're going to go with is Kirara Hoshi, who Kirara has a very good curse technique, where it effectively forces anyone that they have marked to have to move in a certain pattern in order to actually reach them. And if they don't move in a required order, then other people that have the same star marked onto them will end up getting hit by objects with those stars. Now, Kirara is pretty good of a sorcerer when it comes to fighting against most people, mainly because most people aren't going to realize the pattern they need to move in. The main reason why Megumi was able to beat them was because he got lucky to have a star-obsessed sister. However, because of that, I have two ways in mind to improve Kirara's technique. The first way is just changing the objects that they have access to. Have Kirara carry things like knives, daggers, blades, as well as maybe even bombs if possible, but I doubt bombs mainly because they still exist in Japan. So have them start to carry all of that, and when people move out of line, all of those weapons suddenly hit them. The second thing I have in mind in order to improve Kirara's technique is pretty simple. Give Kirara more constellation signs that they can move in. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is possible for Kirara to do, however, if it is possible, then this would end up helping them tremendously. There's also something else that I have in mind, which is the reversal of this technique and making Kirara use the technique on themselves. This would be done in order to give them a speed boost so they can move to objects they've marked much faster. So yeah, considering Kirara should be around the semi-grade 1 to grade 1 level already in canon, considering they are capable of fighting against Megumi in my opinion, I think they should be a capable grade 1 in this at their full potential. However, up next we're going to move on to the big 5 students, those being Nobara, Yuji, Megumi, Yuta, and Hakari, and we're going to start out with Nobara. Now, I feel there are a lot of ways to amp up Nobara's curse technique and really make her an absolute powerhouse in the verse. However, I do want to go over a couple things that are rather important to know about Nobara's technique before we even get into amping it. Number 1, Resonance has no power limiter to it. What I mean by that is, if Nobara uses Resonance on an opponent, it doesn't matter how much stronger the opponent's soul is than Nobara, it is going to hit and do really good damage to them. The main reason we know that is for a couple of reasons. Number 1, Resonance did really good damage to Mahito, despite the fact that Nobara considered Nanami to be on a completely different level from her, and then Yuji is much stronger than Nanami, and Mahito is stronger than that Yuji. However, even more importantly, Nobara was able to use it on Sukuna. Sure, yes, it was a massively output nerf Sukuna, but that massively output nerf Sukuna is able to fight against a much stronger Yuji than the one that had fought in the past. Because JJK characters don't just get power-ups from being close to death unless they very specifically force themselves to, like Mahito did. It also should be noted there isn't really implied to be a bare minimum size of what Nobara can use resonance on, considering the smallest thing we see Nobara use resonance through is a finger. However, we are going to return to the resonance point later because that will be relevant in a little bit. First, I'm going to talk about hairpin and how Nobara uses her nails. Nobara uses hairpin in a total of two main ways. The first way that she uses hairpin as is a bunch of nails she launches out as a projectile, and the second way she uses it is putting it on the ground and preparing it as a trap in order to activate hairpin. Now up first, one of the main things that I think I would have Nobara do is actually start to focus curse energy into the nails ahead of time rather than having to do it actively in the battle. This allows two separate things. Number one, it allows her to not have to expend anywhere near as much curse energy for hairpin in advance, mainly because she would have expended that curse energy days ago, and it would allow her to, if needed, add even more curse energy, basically doubling the power potentially. This would also make the potential of hairpin to be much more explosive because of how much more power it could have. This would also result in Nobara getting curse energy training because she would constantly be pumping her curse energy into those nails, and as a result of that she would need to generate curse energy faster. Furthermore, Nobara could also take inspiration from Yuji's Divergent Fist and make it so in exchange for her hairpin doing half the damage, since the hairpin's going to have double the amount of curse energy infused into it, the second burst of hairpin is going to hit later into the fight after the first one does. They can even do this by making more and more powerful nails that vary on amounts of power that they have access to, allowing them to trick opponents and make different opponents get caught off guard by what Nobara is and is not about to do. Something else that you could add to Nobara and her arsenal is a Shikigami that just exists to store a bunch of nails and scatter them throughout the field in order to set better hairpin traps. Meanwhile, while Nobara is being the main distraction, this Shikigami is just setting up a bunch of these nails so Nobara can direct them to them and bam, all of the hairpins activate. There's also something else that I wanted to add to Nobara's arsenal, which is a literal nail gun. I do want to keep the hammer with the nails that she can fire out directly, but I also think a nail gun would allow Nobara to have a lot more faster of a firing rate for her nails, and imagine her just rapid firing a bunch of nails with curse energy infused into them for her to activate hairpin and spam it. Now, of course, this would take days to prepare for Nobara, but it would still be very helpful for her. I'd also recommend giving Nobara just straight up a bigger hammer as well, or like a bigger hammer to be able to use as a weapon while keeping the smaller hammer around for projectiles and using the bigger hammer for direct melee. And if you think Nobara wouldn't be able to lift this, I just want to remind you guys, Megumi through amping himself up with curse energy could lift several tons inside of a domain in several trucks. If Megumi can do that, then Nobara should be able to lift a bigger hammer. Speaking of, the main purpose of these nails wouldn't even actually be going for lethal spots on the opponent's body, but rather smaller spots on the body. Effectively, the goal with Nobara's technique would be to overwhelm somebody with so many attacks that at least some of their DNA would be able to land on one of the nails, so Nobara could bring it back to herself and activate Resonance in order to forcefully do damage to their soul and stun them for a bit, so she can land the final blow on them. This would be a rather potent combo, especially considering Nobara has proven the ability to use the Black Flash, so if she can rapid fire attacks, that just means more and more chances to even use the Black Flash to begin with. Now, I could see this Nobara easily entering into the high tier grade 1 sorcerer levels. I don't think she would surpass grade 1 level, but I think she would be pretty deep in there. Like, I could see her being on par with Culling Games level Yuji with this resonance that would be very, very effective against literally every sorcerer. However, Nobara's real power would ultimately come in her being a support to her friends in comparison to her being a main person fighter. But still, even with that in mind, Nobara being able to achieve the level of grade 1 and a high-end grade 1 at that is still rather impressive, at least in my mind. And now, after Nobara, we're going to move on to Megumi. Now, the reason the Megumi section is going to be short is not because I don't have ideas for Megumi, but because I've made 3 videos going over Megumi's full potential, as well as a YouTube short talking about Megumi's full potential, so instead I'm just going to summarize basically everything I said in those videos and add on a few more ideas I got both from the comments as well as just new ideas I thought of in general. However, if you want to hear a full in-depth explanation on it, go check out those videos in the full potential playlist. However, the abilities that I have in mind go as followed. Using Wells' Unknown Abyss to have several frogs in the shadow to pull people into the shadow and drown them. Making several Shikigami combos through Wells' Unknown's Abyss, such as Nue and Rabbit Escape, in order to make lightning missile rabbits, Madoka Deer and Rabbit Escape to make flying healers, Also add Nue to that because I forgot to mention Nue even though I said Flying Healer, so anyways, continuing on. Rapid Escape and Piercing Ox to make hundreds of Piercing Ox that are all running at your opponent and gaining more and more power. As you can tell, I think Rapid Escape is broken when used in combination with other Shikigami. Sealing Madoka Deer itself inside of Megumi's shadow while giving it the ability to leak the positive curse energy out through the shadow, both giving Megumi the ability to heal, while also making it sure if he wants to get full heal he has to go inside of the shadow, and as a result of that he can get the full benefits of healing, while also having it be to an even higher degree. Limiting the amount of Shikigami Megumi can use in his domain as a sure hit, mainly because not all of them are really going to be useful inside of a domain. For example, I don't really see Rapid Escape being that useful inside of a domain itself, because they're not really combat-based Shikigami and they wouldn't be useful as a sure hit. Same with other Shikigami like Piercing Ox, because Piercing Ox requires time to move, and Sure Hit does the exact opposite because it makes the attacks instantly appear on them. Same with things like Madoka Deer, that type of good jazz. So basically, mainly the attack type Shikigami, like Nue, like Maharaga, those types of Shikigami should be the ones that are in the Sure Hit. The next thing I do is add a Binding Vow in order to amp the time it takes for a totality to naturally form, such as Divine Dog. The main reason why I believe this is possible is because we know it takes time for it to form, and if you add more time, it just puts the user at more and more risk, so I think this should be possible in order to amp the Shikigami up. Up next is trying to add 10 Shadows itself and the Shadow-like property to a curse tool like a blade. This could theoretically make a blade that would let Megumi teleport whatever he cuts into his shadow, making a durability negating blade because it just automatically goes inside of his shadow. And then of course the final power-up that we have in mind for Megumi is to combine all of the Shikigami abilities through one massive almighty totality, which is something that everybody has speculated about, but an almighty totality through Maharaga and all the other Shikigami combined would have the healing field from Madoka Deer, Maharaga's adaptation, lightning creation, water creation, Piercing Ox's ability, flight, and most of all, the ability to clone itself. And not just like one clone, making millions of clones. So imagine having to fight millions of these things at the same time. One Maharaga is already hard enough to deal with. Now imagine millions of the 10 Shadow Shikigami combined into one that you have to fight all at once. However, now that we got all of the ideas from previous videos established, let's get into even more crazy ways to make Megumi more powerful. Number 1, Megumi's Maharaga should have access to the world-cutting slash, so apply that to the totality we just talked about, and yeah, I feel bad for whoever has to fight against Megumi. Another idea that somebody else came up with is combining Nue with Max Elephant, which will allow people to have lightning water beam cannons, because we already know Nue and Max Elephant are used in tandem, so might as well combine them into one Shikigami. Furthermore, an idea that I have in order to expand on that is just making a small version of the Shikigami, making water manipulation with sparks coming off of it. This was an inspiration from what Sukuna did in his battle against Gojo when he used water like a piercing blood, making what I call Piercing Aqua. Which that is something that Megumi should be able to do, and he should be able to add lightning to it too from Nue, making it some nice combination between lightning and water. Furthermore, they also came up with the idea of combining Piercing Ox with Nue as well as with Max Elephant, mainly because a flying Piercing Ox is a basically ballistic missile, so imagine how deadly Piercing Ox is with the ability to fly, and then using Max Elephant, which is insanely deadly considering Max Elephant already weighs enough, but the more and more it drops, the more and more power it would gain. Finally, Megumi would also have the potential ability of being capable of using Shrine. However, I do want to wait till we cover Yuji in order to actually talk about Megumi's usage of Shrine, mainly because all the usages of Shrine that Yuji could get, Megumi should be able to get. Some of them would take a bit more time, but they should both be able to get those same usages of Shrine. Finally, the final application I have in mind for 10 Shadows to make it as powerful as possible is to apply the Shadow effect that we talked about for a cursed tool on something like a shield rather than a sword. The main purpose of this would be to teleport techniques into Megumi's shadow, so Megumi could launch techniques out of his shadow and not take damage from them. Now this does have risks, mainly because we sealed Madoka Deer inside of Megumi's shadow, but we can always just deactivate the technique or reactivate it, so that won't be as much of a risk as people think. And this is only talking about ways to improve Megumi's curse technique. It should also be remembered, Megumi's curse energy experience is going to get a massive buff because Sukuna had actively been in charge of his body and control of his body for a total of a month. We know what that buff did for Yuji when Sukuna had at most been in control of his body for a couple of hours. Furthermore, Sukuna has also landed several black flashes inside of Megumi's body as well, and all that experience should be memorized by Megumi's body. Megumi should also be able to use RCT and also should know how to make an open barrier domain, considering Sukuna not just used it one time, but has used an open barrier domain a total of 6 times. Now yes, I know Megumi is not good with barrier techniques, but at the same time, the body is going to remember this experience, so that's not really going to be an issue for Megumi, at least in my opinion. Furthermore, he's also going to get a bunch of curse energy residue as well from Sukuna being in charge of his body for that long. Now, I do think for obvious reasons this Megumi ends up surpassing Gojo. If you're going to question why, just a reminder, this is a Megumi that has a Maharaga that can clone itself, that has access to the world-cutting slash. So yeah, I think it's pretty obvious as to why he surpasses Gojo. Now, if we assume that Megumi has the potential access to Shrine, I think we can say without a doubt that Megumi is going to be stronger than Sukuna. If he doesn't have access to Shrine, I think it's a closer fight, but I still would end up giving it to this Megumi over Sukuna. I think this Megumi would classify as special grade for obvious reasons, whether it's for the world cutting slash or having hundreds of creatures that the more and more they run, the more and more power they gain. There is no country I can see on the planet standing a chance against Megumi. However, there is one specific point I kind of want to hone in for Megumi, which is the fact we don't really know everything about his curse technique yet, even though this is how far I'm going. Now, some of you guys might be wondering, what do I mean by that? And I mean very specifically Megumi's domain expansion. Megumi's domain expansion began to have a skeleton spine form in the center of it. Now, I don't actually know how to pronounce it, so I'm just going to put it on screen for you guys to read, because this is something that's actually existing in Japanese mythology, but that was starting to form inside of his domain. There's also the potential of adding a reversal to Megumi as well, which just does apply to other characters as well, but the main one I think this can potentially apply to is Megumi because of how much versatility that 10 Shadows already has, and then reversing the curse techniques. I don't really know what that would equal to, but I think it's still possible and worth mentioning nonetheless. And now we're going to move on to Yuji and the full potential of Yuji Itadori. Now up first, we're already starting out at a pretty good point for Yuji, mainly because of one of Urame's own statements, where they said, does Yuji have potential that can match Sukuna-sama? Which is very heavily implications that Yuji is the same level of potential as Sukuna. So does that mean that full potential Yuji is just equal to Sukuna? In my opinion, no. I think you can generally take Shrine a lot farther than even Sukuna took it, which also funnily enough matches Sukuna's mindset and how he is as a sorcerer. He doesn't think he mastered Shrine, he still is trying to improve it even further. That's the purpose of getting the world cutting slash to begin with. Sukuna doesn't think he has reached the utmost level of his potential. He never calls himself the strongest or anything like that. He is not content with where he is in strength. All of this is just to say I believe Yuji does have room to grow even further beyond Sukuna. Furthermore, Yuji also has access to even more modern knowledge and other abilities too, such as blood manipulation and just his insane level of physical ability and skills. Now, one of the first things that I would have Yuji do is watch a bunch of martial arts movies. Now, you might be wondering, why would we have Yuji do that? Well, it's because of something really interesting that we find out through one of the data books, which is the fact that Yuji didn't actually learn the Manji kick on his own. He learned it because he watched a movie and copied that move. Which is also, funnily enough, some really good foreshadowing to Sukuna's entire ability to copy anything he sees, as long as it's not a cursed technique, as stated by Hana. So if we make Yuji watch a bunch of martial arts movie, he might be able to become just a full-on martial arts master in like a year at most, which is absolutely crazy that Yuji can become one of the biggest hand-to-hand masters with his already immense physical strength in basically under a year if we have him sit down and watch a bunch of movies, while he can still do all the other type of training that we're going to talk about in this video. Now up first are applications of blood manipulation. Funnily enough, I'm not actually going to give Yuji all the applications of blood manipulation I thought of, mainly because I do believe Shrine has better version of range attacks in comparison to blood manipulation. However, blood manipulation still would have some useful ones, considering Yuji's blood should be poisonous. The reason why I say Yuji's blood should be poisonous specifically against sorcerers is because he does have the body of a death painting. It should be remembered Sukuna is immune to poison, so that is why his blood manipulation hasn't affected anyone yet, but it might actually be poisonous and might be useful against other sorcerers. For Yuji, I would recommend having his blood manipulation very specifically be focused on his hand-to-hand capabilities. So this means learning things like Flowing Red Scale Stack, as well as Blood Meteorite, as those are mainly primarily hand-to-hand based capabilities and could help with things like Yuji's defenses as well as Yuji's basic offenses. Furthermore, as I talked about in the blood manipulation full potential video, another idea that we can have in order to amp up Yuji's blood manipulation is to allow him to amp up his heat even more than Flowing Red Scale Stack already does, which would amp up his ability to do damage even further. However, there's something that Yuji can do that might be even better, and I don't really think most blood manipulation users could actually pull this off, but the reason why I think Yuji could pull it off is because of how much of a master he is with timing, very specifically with the Black Flash as well as Divergent Fist. This is a technique that I got inspiration from One Punch Man, being the exploding heart release fist. The main reason why I think it works for Yuji is because of how it functions, where the way that it functions is by making the heartbeat beat rapidly alongside the moment that somebody punches in order to make their power much more explosive. Now if that sounds familiar, it should be, because it's very similar to how the Black Flash functions, where the Black Flash functions by you applying your curse energy at the absolute last second within a millionth of a second. Now, I could see this having very high levels of risk, but at the same time, Yuji is one of the few people who I can see being capable of this, mainly because he already has a non-standard body, he's good with the Black Flash, which is what would the timing require, and he's also kind of the person who is willing to give his body away to do something like this, because man is insane like that. So this would amp up the explosive power he already has massively as a blood manipulation extension technique. Furthermore, this is also something Yuji could just practice while doing normal hand-to-hand combat anyways, because it would just be amping up his normal hand-to-hand capabilities. Also, if Yuji does end up damaging his heart, he does have RCT which he can use on his heart, so he's going to be fine. Up next, if you guys watch my series on what if Yuji awoke Shrine early, you're going to recognize this next application that I'm about to give Yuji, but for people who haven't, I would recommend checking out that series. The next application I have in mind for Yuji's Shrine is to apply it to his fists. Basically, an application that came up with Yuji Dismantles is him surrounding his entire fist in those slashes, similar to what Sukuna does in order to catch Maki's blade, however applying that to his hand-to-hand style in general. This would allow Yuji to effectively do double the amount of damage, where he can land both punches on people while immediately slashing at them. Currently, Yuji has the problem of needing to slash people and then land punches on them, however this would allow him to do both at the same time while also fitting heavily with his style. Something else that I could see Yuji doing is also a mixture between the two curse techniques. Now, based on everything we know, it is impossible to have two curse techniques active at a time. However, something I could see Yuji pulling off is using Dismantle to launch himself, and then using Blood Manipulation to amp his speed midair, and then swapping back to Dismantle in order to make a powerful attack while using the built-up speed and momentum from both the other attacks, basically comboing it together by using them in very quick succession. This also fits very well with Yuji's curse energy property that he has access to, which is the Divergent Fist. And as much as the Divergent Fist was something born from a poor control of curse energy, it is still a rather useful tactic, especially because based on what we can tell, no one can actually detect the Divergent Fist. Mahito hasn't done it, Sukuna hasn't done it, nobody has ever detected the Divergent Fist. The only one who might be able to detect it is Gojo with his 6 eyes, and even then that is a maybe. However, that lag in curse energy might become even more broken if Yuji finds a potential way to actually control that lag and utilize it on curse techniques, especially with Shrine. For example, this could allow Yuji to set potential traps where he lands a punch on somebody and they think that Yuji hadn't landed on a Dismantle, but with enough time, eventually one will trigger to allow Yuji to smack someone into a Black Flash. Kind of similar to the tactic that Gojo did with the red in order to launch Sukuna away by faking Sukuna out by making him think the red had activated already. Of course, it wouldn't function anywhere near the same, but it would still have the similar type of effect of being able to catch people off guard to allow Yuji to strike them. However, there is one more thing Yuji has access to that would really amplify his power heavily, and that thing is the World Cutting Slash. In my opinion, Yuji should be capable of using it with enough time eventually, both because he had seen Sukuna use it enough times, but also because he would have Megumi around who Megumi would remember the experience because he was awake for it, and could potentially help in explaining it to Yuji. So yeah, you grant Yuji the ability to have a one-shot level slash that can one-shot most people in the first, especially because he would only need to make one hand sign, not 3, because remember, the main reason Sukuna needs to make 3 hand signs in Chant is because he needed to make a binding vow so he could do it without any hand signs when he was fighting against Gojo. Furthermore, I could also see Yuji making a hand-to-hand variant specifically, which might actually be able to bypass the hand sign condition because it would be limited to close range and being on Yuji's hands while using it in tandem with the Dismantle Fist I talked about earlier. Of course, I'm not fully sure if that's possible, but at the same time, the World Cutting Slash is literally just a dismantle that's targeting existence and the world itself rather than just targeting a person. Plus, we know the World Cutting Slash can travel thanks to Maki dodging it, so in my opinion, this should be possible. And it would give a whole new layer of combat to Yuji's hand-to-hand combat, because imagine if he just has World Cutting Slashes he can punch with. So while Yuji doesn't have the perfect body for Jujutsu Sorcery like Sukuna does, I do see this Yuji being on par with, if not maybe a little bit stronger than Sukuna. However, I can see this Yuji actually being able to beat Sukuna relatively easily, mainly because this Yuji would be a perfect counter to Sukuna with his entire soul abilities. However, I can see Yuji being on par, if not a bit stronger than Sukuna. There's one more part that I think is very important to add. I think Yuji is one of the two sorcerers that I think could possibly end up awakening an open barrier domain, because Sukuna had already used it twice in his body. Now, I don't think it would be as easy for someone like Megumi, because Megumi had felt Sukuna use an open barrier domain 5 to 6 times in his body, but I think it would be possible for Yuji, even though he's only felt it 2 times. But yeah, that's the final part for Yuji, and where I think Yuji's full potential lies. An immense amount of physical power possible to him, the full avenues of blood manipulation as well as shrine possible to him, and finally the world-cutting slash and the divergent fist, and a master of martial arts with great RCT, as well as simple domain, and finally an open barrier domain as well. So I think this is easily special grade, and around the same level of Sukuna, a bit stronger than him in my opinion. I would have loved to give Yuji some power-ups based around the soul, but we don't know enough about the soul to give Yuji power-ups based on that. But if Yuji did have any powers based around the soul that could end up powering him up, that's not just mainly focused around vessels, then that would be added too. But I'm going to leave that for you guys to think about in the comment section down below on ways to power up Yuji based on soul power-ups, if you have any ideas that you can justify. Now up next is Hakari. How do I advance Hakari? Well, in my opinion, Hakari's curse technique itself is already a really good curse technique. A domain expansion that's naturally good at clashing and having the ability to give Hakari infinite amount of curse energy for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, making him completely immortal. I think that's a really good curse technique. However, I think there's more Hakari can do with the infinite amount of curse energy he has itself. Now, Hakari does have the doors as well as the balls, but we don't really know how good they are in combat itself, considering Hakari never uses it on anyone other than Yuji that we have seen so far, so I can't really say much about those. And I have 2 ways on how to actually improve Hakari's curse technique. And one of the simple ways is curse energy discharge, which is basically have Hakari learn how to fire out his curse energy like projectiles. That'll immediately give him range as well as the ability to fire attacks on more people. And the best part is for Hakari, he wouldn't really have a size limit or an amount limit that he could fire out, because he has infinite energy while he's in Jackpot. So he could just spam out these massive curse energy balls at people, or minor ones that are acting more like machine gun rapid fire, all towards an opponent, and overwhelm them with massive amount of firepower, all while never getting tired himself. And then finally, there's the real way to make Hakari even more broken and even more powerful, which is something that I want to add to his domain expansion especially. Where basically the idea I have in mind is that Hakari has access to several tools that have varying levels of curse energy output that they are able to output of the infinite amount of curse energy that Jackpot has access to, with of course the number 777 having by far and away the strongest weapon. This way we can stick onto the entire luck theme that exists with Hakari. This was inspired by a character from Hunter x Hunter known as Kite, mainly because I think that's something really cool to apply to Hakari. However, that's at least my opinion on the biggest things you can really do for Hakari's curse technique, like give him different weapons that are linked to the domain, and whatever number he lands ends up resulting in him getting a different weapon to fight alongside him during the battle against whoever he's up against. Maybe give him Shikigami as well, so it's not just him alone, but also other things that also wield an infinite amount of CE with limited output similar to himself. That way Hakari can make basically any fight a jumping. Now, I know there are some belief that Hakari does have access to luck manipulation, but in my opinion, I don't think there is enough that exists in JJK to prove that for me to say that for certainty, similar to the soul stuff for Yuji's powers. While I think that Hakari is a bit stronger than his canon counterpart, I don't think it's going to be too much stronger than his canon counterpart. However, maybe I'm just not looking deep enough into Hakari, and this is just the initial things that I can come up with off the top of my head. Now up next is the Yuta section, which I'm going to make this section rather small. Now some of you guys might be wondering, why would I make this small? And that's mainly because of one main reason. In my opinion, I don't think there's much to talk about for how to improve Yuta, other than give Yuta this curse technique here, give Yuta this curse technique. I think that would just get really boring for me to talk about, so instead I want to talk about Yuta's mechanics for copying themselves, and how to make them better, such as the timer he has, which only lasts for 5 minutes, outside of the domain of course, as well as his ability to use Rika. Those are the things I want to target, mainly because if we can alter the base of Yuta and make him have a stronger base, it would end up helping everything else about Yuta much better. Also because there are tons of videos that have already existed on giving Yuta a list of cursings that he should copy, so I'm not going to repeat that. Instead, what I want to do is give Yuta 2 separate modes of using his curse technique rather than his main version that he uses. Now, Yuta's main flaw of his curse technique is the fact that he can only use it for 5 minutes. Furthermore, in order to gain access to someone's technique, he needs to eat a part of the person's body. If the part is not big enough, then Yuta has to make a binding vow to limit the amount of uses he has of the technique. Furthermore, he doesn't have automatic mastery of any technique, but that's not really something we can fix. And finally, if the part is healed, then the copy is made null and void. The main part that I want to focus on is the 5-minute timer part, as the other two have rather easy solutions, which is just Yuta killing his opponent, but at the same time, that means Yuta has to mainly use copy on enemies because I don't see him killing any of his friends. The two modes that I have access to for Yuta are linked to him putting the finger on different rings. Why did I say the finger on different rings? The two modes that I have in mind for Yuta is him putting rings on separate fingers, where each of the fingers have a binding vow linked to it, where one of the fingers would specifically be to increase the timer heavily, where in turn Yuta would have to use double the amount of curse energy for each of the techniques, but giving him access to all the curse techniques for 10 minutes rather than 5 minutes. And you would think this would be a problem normally until you remember the fact that Rika gives Yuta infinite amount of curse energy, so it would just be more draining for him to use, but at the same time Rika would replenish that curse energy pretty fast unless Rika ends up getting destroyed. This ends up fixing one of Yuta's major problems that he has, where he's only able to fight with 5 minutes while the copy techniques, but now he has much longer battle duration with him having 10 minutes. And if you don't think that would work either, then you could specifically make it so in this mode for 10 minutes, Yuta is limited to only 4 curse techniques rather than all the curse techniques he could access and hot swap between. Well, yes, he can only use 1 at a time. In this specific mode, he could only use 4 that he would select before putting on the ring itself, as a binding vow in order to extend the time. And the other mode that I have in mind for Yuta is what I would basically consider to be a 1-minute last resort type mode, where Yuta only has access to all the curse techniques for a total of 1 minute, but in exchange for that, the output would be amped massively. Like, I could see this end up amping all the output of the techniques that he has copied by 500% in exchange for the fact that he has limited it to be a fifth of the time. And this would give him a large amount of power that could be used if he wants to do like a final move. And he could probably just hot swap between the rings, where he immediately goes with a 10-minute ring and then goes to the 1-minute ring at the last moment for a final finishing blow. Basically, if he needs power, he would go with the 1-minute mode. If he needs a drawn-out battle, he'd go with the 10-minute mode. And if he needs something in between, he'd go with his normal ring finger. And this would especially go well in the domain as well, because I could see Yuta being able to activate the 1-minute mode inside of the domain for a final move in order to finish something off, while using the domain to make sure he doesn't need to worry about a timer until the 1-minute mode comes up in that massively amped state. Now, I do think Yuta does have the potential to eventually reach Gojo's level, so I'm just going to say Yuta at his full potential should be around the level of Gojo, with him in the 1-minute mode probably being much stronger than him. And now finally onto the teamwork section, and unfortunately there isn't really much that they can really do for the teamwork section. Now, I do want to note this and how the teamwork section works. It is more so me specifically talking about how they can use each other's abilities to improve each other as fighters, rather than them having team tactics. If I were to list off their team tactics, I would be here all day, and that's not really what this video was for. If you guys do want to see me come up with team tactics for JJK duos to use, then tell me that in the comment section down below. But this is more so made for how individual characters can effectively help each other get stronger. For example, something we gave in the Kyoto video is Mekamaru just creating weapons for all the students. And the only thing I can see them doing is, like, maybe Yuji has the capability of turning his dry blood into tools which he can give to everybody else, like Maki for extra armor. If we give the assumption that the gauntlets Yuji has made is made out of his dry blood from blood manipulation and not just some random curse tool. Other than that, there isn't really much they can actually do in teamwork, unfortunately. However, I do find it kind of funny that Kyoto High just has much more teamwork potential than Tokyo High does. But yeah, that's ultimately the full potential of all the students in Jujutsu High. So I'm curious to see where you guys would rank them. Do you guys agree with where I would rank the students, or do you guys think they're stronger than they are at their full potential and I gave them credit for in this video, or even weaker? I want to hear what you guys think in the comment section down below. It's a well-known fact that a lot of characters are strong because of their curse techniques. Even with Gojo saying extremely early on that most of your innate potential comes from having a curse technique, around 80% of that. So today I wanted to explore how far someone can be pushed and what is the level someone can achieve if they take the optimal steps in order to reach their peak even though they don't have a curse technique. Because from what we can tell, there are a lot of sorcerers without curse techniques. So in this video, I'm going to try and see how far can we push someone without a curse technique. In other words, how to become strong without a curse technique. I'm Eternal Flame, and let's get straight into this. Now, in order to figure out how strong a sorcerer can become without a curse technique, the most important character we're going to have to look at up first is Kusakabe, as Kusakabe is by far and away the strongest sorcerer currently without a curse technique. For example, Meme had once said to Yuji in Shibuya that she had never seen anyone get this strong without a curse technique before since Kusakabe, which implies that Kusakabe is the only one who was able to reach Yuji early Shibuya levels without having a curse technique, which is insanely impressive. This is the same Yuji who was able to harm Hanami with their punches, able to take on the Grasshopper Curse, which the Grasshopper Curse should be around the level of a grade 1 curse, purely because of the fact that it was ranked as a grade 2 just because it didn't actually have a curse technique. It should have been ranked higher. And able to help take out one of the death paintings. And yet Mei's not even implying with that statement that Kusakabe is on the same level as Yuji, just that she had never seen someone get this strong since Kusakabe, which means Kusakabe is more than likely stronger than that Yuji, which makes a lot of sense with something we found out in the most recent chapter, where both Gojo, Mei, and Nanami all agree that Kusakabe is the strongest grade 1 sorcerer, albeit Gojo does says it's different if we're including the big 3 families, which, considering a lot of the feats that Kusakabe shows off, he really does stand by that claim, even though Kusakabe himself doesn't actually agree with that claim. With Kusakabe achieving several impressive feats, such as deflecting a maximum Uzumaki with Mahito infused into it thanks to his new shadow style, as well as being able to perception blitz Miwa, who Maki could move relative to Nanami in terms of speed, and being able to have a sparring match with Yuji in order to help Yuji achieve his new soul powers that he has access to, in order to help him perfect the technique. And not just any Yuji, this was a massively stronger than Culling Games level Yuji because of 214 Yuji, and yet Kusakabe was still able to spar with that same Yuji. Now the reason I took the time to establish all of that is just to show the potential that you can have even without having a curse technique. As I said beforehand, all the established grade 1s of Mei, Nanami, and Gojo all agree that Kusakabe is the strongest grade 1 excluding the big 3 families, which the reason why that is so important is because it should put Kusakabe above Mei. While Nanami I don't think is all of that strong, as I talked about in Nanami vs Kusakabe, if you want to know my opinion on Nanami vs Kusakabe, which this chapter just heavily helped to put that opinion further roof and just straight up confirm it, Mei is the more impressive one, as she does have access to the Bird Strike move. The Bird Strike move being able to one-shot special grade curses with a Death Binding Vow, and yet Kusakabe is still deemed stronger than her. Someone who would also manage to push their body to their utmost physical limits. Now, I don't think Uyui is included in that statement, but I do think that means Bird Strike is included in that statement. Bird Strike being something that Gojo, Sukuna, and Kenjaku all want to directly avoid, as stated by Mei herself when Sukuna used Kamutoke to counter. Kusakabe managed to achieve this level of strength without taking any shortcuts to get this strong. No binding vows involved, no hyper-given strength from being an experiment, and no curse technique. No amazing family that he comes from. All of this was from hard work and training. But that's just Kusakabe's feats. Now we're also going to talk about New Shadow Style, the thing that puts Kusakabe on the map as being so powerful. New Shadow Style is an advanced version of Simple Domain, mainly made to counter attacks as well as domain expansions. However, Kusakabe has an even better version of it that's made more for attacking, which is the Bato Sword Drawing. And with the Bato Sword Drawing, he's effectively able to focus the curse energy into one slash, as well as make sure it's guaranteed to hit. And through that, he was able to deflect Maximum Uzumaki into the ground. The same Maximum Uzumaki that had a Mahito infused into it. Not just any Mahito, but a Mahito that had just gotten massively stronger through battling against Yuji and pushed to evolve heavily, as well as other cursed spirits placed into the Maximum Uzumaki as well that we don't know about, but we know Mahito was certainly in there. And he was able to achieve all of this without a cursed technique, which is absolutely bonkers. Now, I do actually have a theory that the reason why Kusakabe was able to become so strong is basically because, unlike everyone else who has to split their focus and time between developing their cursed technique, figuring out how to use their cursed technique, as well as just base energy combat with cursed energy reinforcement, Kusakabe has the leisure and pleasure of just needing to focus on cursed energy combat, as well as the applications and honing those. He just has something less to focus on than everyone else. Where, unlike everyone else who has several skills that they're trying to spend equal amount of times in, Kusakabe focuses everything into one skill, which is cursed energy reinforcement, which is what has allowed him to get this strong. Or at least that's my theory on why he was able to get this strong. All of this is just to say that Kusakabe is the start and the base of what you need in order to make a strong sorcerer without a cursed technique. Basically, take everything about Kusakabe and we're going to apply it to this sorcerer. Now, we don't actually know if Kusakabe has landed a Black Flash in the past or not. I'm going to assume for the sake of this video that Kusakabe has not landed a Black Flash at all in the past. So one of our sorcerer's goals is going to be to land a Black Flash, because the Black Flash massively helps to increase your curse energy understanding and by extension makes you stronger all around. For example, after Yuji had landed one Black Flash, he went from not being able to damage Hanami to being able to steadily damage him with his own punches. So of course the Black Flash is going to be an important thing, but the next important thing is going to be a different character we're actually going to focus on, which is a character that I think a lot of people, me myself included, forgot about until this very video, which that character is Mechamaru. Now you might be wondering this, what is Mechamaru going to do in order to help us? Mechamaru has a curse technique. There's nothing we can really take from him, aside from one thing. The thing we can take from him is, in the battle against Mahito, Mechamaru had displayed the ability to put simple domain into canisters that could be fired out against an opponent. These same canisters are able to bypass Mahito's technique because of the fact that it's a sure hit condition, so it's always destined to hit the opponent, at least once these canisters make contact with an opponent. Now when Mechamaru used this canister, someone who doesn't even know how to use New Shadow Style on his own was able to use it and destroy a part of Mahito's soul. And it should also be remembered, these canisters are so small that it only was a little part of Mahito's body when it actually landed on him. Now imagine what each of these canisters could have done if it was a Kusakabe style New Shadow Style simple domain landing hit. The same New Shadow Style that was able to deflect a maximum Uzumaki with Mahito infused into it. And now just imagine these as attacks on their own. So if you can follow where I'm going with this, we're going to turn New Shadow Style into a projectile for the same method that Mechamaru does it. Just instead we're going to place it on things like daggers or maybe even bullets if we have to, because that would be incredibly efficient and it would help to cover the weakness that most sorcerers without a curse technique have, being that they don't have a ranged attack. Now you'll be able to fight people out of range. This is when we're going to get into the next step, which this is my favorite step where we talk about Shikigami. Now, I'm actually kind of surprised Kusakabe doesn't use a Shikigami if I'm being honest, because it's something that's forgotten by a lot of people. Anyone can make a Shikigami. They are not linked to a curse technique. It just is a very simple Shikigami. Now, it should also be noted, the process of creating a Shikigami is incredibly difficult. So, for the sake of this video, we're only going to give them 2 Shikigami at best, because even then, there were a lot of people who were like saying that I was pushing it a little bit by giving another character free Shikigami in the blood manipulation video, so yeah. The first Shikigami that we're going to create is basically the expansion on the idea of turning simple domain into a projectile in the same way that Mechamaru does it. Where if you think that having a canister of this size is necessary and you can't just do it as projectile-based weapons, this is what that Shikigami is going to be for. That's basically its only purpose. A Shikigami that exists just to fire out New Shadow Style at opponents using the canisters to land the hits on them, offering range support to the sorcerer. This could also offer as extra support if it is possible to fire ranged applications of New Shadow Style without it being in a canister in the way that Mechamaru does it. And the second one is going to be another Shikigami that exists purely for countering domains, where it's constantly charging up a New Shadow Style simple domain, infusing more and more curse energy into it, and also setting up a binding vow on it, where this Shikigami can only be summoned and activated when they're against a domain wielder. As in the moment a domain activates, they can activate their New Shadow Style simple domain. Because there is the issue of, it is still very, very hard for this sorcerer to fight against domain users for good reason, so at least this gives them even more assurance against a domain user. Now while New Shadow Style is amazing, this isn't the only thing that can be granted in order to make someone powerful without a curse technique. This is where we're going to get into the next aspect of making someone strong without a curse technique, which that aspect is cursed energy traits. Now in JJK we have seen a total of 3 cursed energy traits. The first cursed energy trait being the Divergent Fist, which Divergent Fist is just delayed cursed energy. However, it does seem to have an advantage of it's very hard to actually sense the Divergent Fist, because Mahito wasn't able to sense the Divergent Fist despite being aware of the Divergent Fist. There's Hakari's cursed energy trait, which makes his cursed energy incredibly rough, and then there's finally Kashima's cursed energy trait, which allows him to utilize electricity, which also makes it so people are stunned after making direct contact with Kashimo. Now for the sake of this video, we are going to ignore Kashima's cursed energy trait, purely because of the simple fact that we don't know how Kashima's cursed energy trait came to be and how linked it is to his cursed technique, because it feels a lot more linked to his cursed technique in comparison to Hakari or Yuji's. But we are mainly going to look at Hakari's cursed energy trait of having rough cursed energy, and we're going to apply that to our sorcerer, which should end up helping the attack power of the sorcerer even more. And this is what we're going to get into the final section of this, which is Binding Vows. As you know, Binding Vows are the easiest path to gaining power and gaining power incredibly quickly. So our sorcerer is going to need to have a similar Binding Vow to Nanami's Binding Vow, where they are limiting themselves for certain parts of the day, and in exchange in other parts of the day, they are able to operate at 120% power. Now basically by having a similar limiting binding valve like that one, they should be able to amplify their power even more. Now the exact conditions of the binding valve is unknown because it depends on the sorcerer and their life. However, this could be used very well, which could be used to make their base curse energy reinforcement even stronger, which will help in all aspects of them being a sorcerer. Finally, putting them up against missions that will push them to their limits is going to be their best way for them to improve overall. I think one of the greatest weaknesses that Kusakabe has that prevents his growth is his desire to not fight against special grade curses like the disaster curses. Now, while he might not win, if he were to take that gamble, he might end up getting even stronger than he already is. Now, I wouldn't say this is cowardice, but more so having value of life to begin with. However, Jujutsu is very much a system that is based on gambling your life away and figuring out if you can get strong or not by taking massive risks. Of course, sometimes you might end up losing, sometimes you might not get that gamble, sometimes you might not succeed. But it's better to live the fever than it is to just continue living on your normal life and not taking risks. Because then in the end, you can at least say you tried your best to achieve the peak of what you can achieve. But that's basically everything that I thought about for how to make a sorcerer strong without having a curse technique. Now there are obviously still going to be some limits. Even with everything I put in, it's still going to be hard to counter domains. But this is everything that I could think about. Curse Spirit Manipulation. It's a curse technique that belongs to special grade Suguru Geto as well as Kenjaku while he possesses Suguru Geto's body. In nature, it's actually a pretty simple curse technique, where after the user has defeated a cursed spirit, they're able to consume said cursed spirit as an orb in order to add it to their collection for them to continue to fight with later on, giving them full access to Curse Spirit Manipulation and summoning this curse basically like a Shikigami, but not really a Shikigami, that they can use to fight in battle for them. So today, we're going to break this technique and make it absolutely as overpowered as we can be. Welcome to what is the full potential of Curse Spirit Manipulation. I'm Eternal Flame, and welcome to the continuation of the series of what is the full potential of blank. Now up first, we are going to need to go over the two problems we're going to need to overcome for the sake of making an overpowered Curse Spirit Manipulation user. With the first problem being, the Curse Spirit Manipulation user is going to have to be powerful even without Curse Spirit Manipulation. This is due to a unique power that Curse Spirit Manipulation users have, where if they are more powerful than a Curse Spirit directly, they're able to completely absorb them without even needing to fight them, which is going to prevent us from taking a lot of damage from battles, and just overall make things easier for the Curse Spirit Manipulation user in the process. However, it's the second problem that is really a massive problem with Cursed Spirit Manipulation as a whole. With this second problem being, as soon as a Cursed Spirit is absorbed, it is no longer capable of growing stronger at all. Which means as soon as you absorb a Cursed Spirit, that Cursed Spirit will remain at that strength till the day it eventually dies. It's also debatable of whether if the Cursed Spirit gets a full restore basically after you do defeat the Cursed Spirit and absorb it, or if they are just basically at the state of the injured near-death state if you beat them in battle instead. Basically, to give an example from Pokemon, imagine that you catch a Pokemon, but that Pokemon is capped at that level. We don't know if that Pokemon is going to remain at the same HP after you battle that Pokemon, after capturing it, or if they're going to get a full health after you capture that Pokemon as a result. It's basically the same way with Cursed Spirit Manipulation. However, in spite of those being the only two limits we know directly to exist on Cursed Spirit Manipulation, I do believe those limits are possible to be overcome in order to make an incredibly strong curse technique and an incredibly strong user, one that's even capable of surpassing the limits of Special Grade, considering Suguru Geto was able to achieve Special Grade just off of Cursed Spirit Manipulation alone. Now, the Cursed Spirit Manipulation user is going to need to start training in Curse Reinforcement in order to get strong. It's basically going to be extremely similar to what I did with the 10 Shadows user, where they're going to immediately start learning how to do the Black Flash, because that is the easiest way to get strong in terms of base curse energy manipulation and reinforcement within Jujutsu Kaisen. However, unlike the 10 Shadows user who is just going to be taking a lot of missions, the Cursed Spirit Manipulation user is going to have an entirely different mindset when it comes to actually fighting these cursed spirits, where they are going to purposefully have to toy around with the cursed spirits in order for them to get stronger by battling directly against them. We're going to want the cursed spirits that the Cursed Spirit Manipulation user fights to achieve their peaks and pinnacles that they can achieve through direct battle, but make sure they don't reach such a point that they become too dangerous and impossible for them to absorb. Now, some of you guys might be questioning, why are we taking such a risky and dangerous approach with this entire thing? Doesn't this risk the life of the Cursed Spirit Manipulation user? Well, this is actually very similar to what Kenjaku directly did with Mahito, where he allowed Mahito to evolve, allowed Mahito to grow and grow more through battling Yuji directly right before absorbing him. using Yuji basically as a method for Mahito to evolve, mainly because of the simple thing of what I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Once you absorb a cursed spirit with cursed spirit manipulation, they are no longer able to grow and evolve, and this is something they're going to know as well, which is why you're going to want to push these cursed spirits to their limits in order to improve. For example, pushing a grade 3 cursed spirit to achieve the level of a grade 2 cursed spirit, or maybe even a grade 2 to a grade 1. All of these can end up stacking up. Furthermore, the cursed spirit manipulation user in their spare time should also just start collecting a bunch of grade 4s as well, and just other grade curses after pushing them to their limits. Grade 4 cursed spirits, just collect them freely because they're kind of just weak and they're overall never going to improve to matter that much overall. But it's still good to just collect as many cursed spirits as possible. However, these grade 4 cursed spirits do still have an entire use, which is where we're going to return to binding vows once again, being one of the most useful things in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, and that's a message I'm going to make sure to hone into a lot of people's heads. Effectively, we're going to turn grade 4 cursed spirits into Bird Strike, because of the fact that they have not really that much of a life to begin with, and they're kind of just really weak. So it'll be really useful to instead turn them to life-sacrificing cursed spirits to launch at people, since basically that's how they're used anyways, so why not get the full potential out of them as a result of that? Now, there is a potential chance that a binding vow like Bird Strike would not work on these type of cursed spirits, purely because of the fact through cursed spirit manipulation, cursed spirits are not allowed to improve more. However, this is a gamble that we still do not know if possible or not, so why not try it, am I right? Best case scenario, you have a bunch of grade 4 cursed spirits that you could stock up on and basically use as a Bird Strike type barrage, and there is actual reasons for why it would work, because we know cursed spirits do have their own life force and life energy. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work and you just use a bunch of them as stalling tactics, like how they're actually used in canon. Now, I would also say I would recommend keeping a few thousand cursed spirits just in stock all the time, like around the grade 4 level, for maximum Uzumakis. The reason why is because you can combine all of those cursed spirits into one incredibly powerful attack to use just in case you end up pushing a cursed spirit way too far and making them evolve way too far that you need a final good attack to finish them off so you can actually absorb them, and boom, you add in this cursed spirit that required you to use a maximum Uzumaki and go through your entire stock of cursed spirits, or at least grade 4 reservoirs, and add it to your collection alongside your already strong cursed spirits that you pushed in order to evolve in order to achieve their limits. However, cursed spirit manipulation offers a lot more than just simply put cursed spirits to join you in fighting. It actually offers you the ability to shape and manipulate the form of the cursed spirits directly itself. This has been directly shown when Kenjaku fought against Chozo and just piled a bunch of cursed spirits together as one kind of blob in order to launch him back. And this manipulation of cursed spirits and shaping allows for quite a lot, which I actually did get a lot of these ideas from one of you guys in the comment section down below named Fortnite Kid, and I'm going to put his comment on screen as I read out the applications that he got. I'm also going to put the link to it, so yeah. Remember, a huge shout out to him because he came up with a lot of the ideas for this, which I'm not going to go over all of them in this video. I'm going to go over the specific ones that I actually really like, and I'm going to let you read the full comment later on. Up first on the list is Cursed Spirit Fusion, which is basically combining all of the super powerful cursed spirits into one incredibly powerful cursed spirit for them to manipulate and utilize. I don't know how possible this fully is, however I do really like the idea of it, and it's going to be very important for the next application they had in mind, which is Cursed Armor, where the user can coat themselves in their ultimate curse to gain access to all of the techniques of the cursed spirits, where basically they're infusing several of the cursed spirits they have absorbed up to this point and just coating it alongside their body as an armor for them to utilize, which gives both defensive and offensive applications. Effectively, imagine Mahito's true form, but just a bunch of cursed spirits that they're manipulating all at once. Summoning Strike, which Summoning Strike is where the user summons a part of the curse or the whole curse at nearby locations beside them, while effectively using these summons as connections directly to the body for the cursed spirit manipulation user to launch out mini Uzumakis directly out from the cursed spirits. Effectively, you know what Kenjaku did at the end of the most recent season, where there were hundreds of those cursed spirits rising out from a little pool. Now imagine each of them were just firing out a mini Uzumaki out from their mouths directly at opponents. This would just make complete hell break out and break loose, as well as finally the ability to turn the cursed spirits into weapons or just cursed tools in general for them to use directly. Now I don't want to go over all of the things the comment said directly, so if you want to read that in your own time, but they came up with a lot more than what I'm saying in this video. I really recommend reading it. But you might be wondering, how are we going to get all of these cursed spirits? Because this is a hard task, even if we're just going off directly what the world will allow us to get through missions. Which is why, to truly achieve the cusps of being an incredibly strong Curse Spirit Manipulation user, you're going to actually have to go down a really dark path. Mainly because of just the nature of Cursed Spirits directly. Quick disclaimer, I'm not recommending you actually do any of this. This is just purely for the sake of advancing a fictional character's superpower about absorbing cursed spirits that are spawned through negative emotions directly. Disclaimer out the way. Alright, let's continue with the video. Cursed spirits spawn in areas where there is a lot of negative emotions associated with the area. The stronger the amount of negative emotions associated with an area or focused towards a specific type of fear, such as with the disaster curses, the stronger the curse that will end up spawning. Which is something that every single Jujutsu sorcerer knows, and more importantly, you're going to farm for your own usage. Now, we're not going to do this in Japan for one very important reason. Every single Jujutsu sorcerer is in Japan, and they're going to catch on very fast to what you're doing. However, their knowledge of what's happening to the outside world is much more limited because of the fact they are much more focused on Japan, which is something that you're going to take direct advantage of as a Cursed Spirit Manipulation user. So you're going to use all of the Cursed Spirits that you have gained up to this point in order to cause havoc. Wreak havoc and start making rumors. Rumors in order to make more and more fear among the masses, which that fear is going to end up spawning likely high-end level curses, likely ranging from grade 1 all the way to maybe special grade level curses, which these curses you can then pick up using Cursed Spirit Manipulation because you're that much stronger than the curse by this point, or at least battle, push it to its limits, and then add that to your collection. Then rinse and repeat over and over again, using this tactic in order to just add more and more cursed spirits to your collection and just get a bigger and bigger collection of varying abilities all across the map. If you want a specific fear, then you take advantage of that and you end up spawning a new curse as a result of that from so many rumors being spread about that fear. You absorb that, bam, you now have that curse technique as added to your arsenal. And before somebody says, okay, the curse techniques that cursed spirits end up getting is not based on the fear they usually embody, while that is true most of the time, we do see this is true directly for the disaster curses, as they all have curse techniques very much based on the fear that they are based on. So yeah. Even if you don't get it on your first try or your second try, you're going to eventually generate enough fear. Eventually, you're going to get a disaster curse-like being for you to absorb that will get the intended curse that you want, and as a result of that, you will get so many cursed spirits that are just created through the negative emotions that you are directly spawning through this tactic. Now, you might be wondering, wouldn't they get caught eventually? No, purely because of the fact that you can very easily just hide yourself or hide your current location. You have so many cursed spirits, it will be way too easy to hide your location. Also, it'll be very hard to figure out this is a sorcerer's work, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. However, even if they do discover you, this is where we're going to get into the next part, which is how to get vengeful cursed spirits. As getting vengeful cursed spirits are actually very different in comparison to getting normal cursed spirits. For a vengeful cursed spirit spawns directly when a sorcerer dies, but the result of their death is not to do with cursed energy. Basically, if it's a non-sorcerer based weapon and they die by that, they will turn into a vengeful spirit rather than just actually dying. Now, this will be significantly harder for them to beat purely because this is a previous sorcerer. However, it will still be possible thanks to the massive bag that this Cursed Spirit Manipulation user is going to have access to. And it'll be pretty easy for you to just overall take over the world with the massive amount of kit that this Cursed Spirit Manipulation user just has direct access to, thanks to everything we've directly given them in this video. However, I do want to know if there's anything else I missed in your opinion, see what else that you guys can potentially think of, and on one more thing before I end this video, huge shout out to one of you guys in the comment section down below named Fortnite Kid, because he was the one who gave me a lot of inspiration for just curse technique and curse spirit manipulation applications in general. I'm gonna see y'all later, peace out, hope y'all have a good day. Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today we're making a video to explore the full potential of 10 Shadows, and I know what some of you guys might be thinking. Eternal, didn't you already create one to explore the full potential of 10 Shadows? Like 2 videos of that? And my simple answer is yes and no. In those videos, I specifically focused on advancing Megumi's full potential and everything we knew about Megumi. I didn't actually focus on creating a 10 Shadow user themselves. That, and in both of those videos, I was kind of focused heavily on the potential of either Megumi being able to become the Shadows and just gain all of their abilities, or just what a true power Maharaga would be like, and what the true power of a full entire fusion of all the 10 Shadows, including Maharaga, would be like. I never really gave it my Eternal Flame spin of how I like to explore the full potential, which is what the entire point of this video is going to be. To create a near perfect sorcerer for the 10 Shadows technique as a whole, and to advance the technique to its absolute limits and see how far we can push it, while still being in the realm of being born as a normal person, so we're not going to give them things like Sukuna's physical body and all of that good jazz. So yeah, let's get on to the video of trying to create a perfect 10 Shadows user. However, with this video, I'm actually going to have a little bit of a goal, where in comparison to my other videos, I just explore the full potential of a technique and how I could advance it. In this video, I have a specific goal on top of wanting to explore the full potential of a technique. Well, actually, I have two goals. My first goal is going to be able to defeat a Gojo clan member or 6 Eyes plus Limitless member without using Maharaga. Or more accurately, to convince you guys that this 10 Shadows user would be capable of defeating them. And to give the example of how strong they're going to be, basically imagine what would happen if you gave Pre-Awakened Gojo, Hollow Purple, and Red. Now, if you think Pre-Awakened Gojo and Post-Awakened Gojo have the same stats and they just got new abilities, then ignore this entire section entirely, just imagine it as that. But if you do think that Post-Awakened Gojo has different stats and is just overall stronger, which I know some people do, then imagine this as Pre-Awakened Gojo if Pre-Awakened Gojo had both Red and Hollow Purple. But they're not going to have the constantly active Limitless barrier because that is a Gojo exclusive thing. And the other goal of this video will be able to convince you that this 10 Shadows user will be capable of taming Maharaga. Now, the reason I'm doing this, both of my goals, is purely because of the fact that a lot of people have a very different belief to me, which I believe that the 10 Shadows user that fought the 6 Eyes plus Limitless user that Gojo was talking about just straight up got a mutual kill on them, and they didn't actually summon Maharaga. Purely because of the fact that I think Megumi was straight up wrong, and the narrative is just straight up portraying that Megumi does not understand what Gojo is trying to tell him, that Megumi has the potential to reach his level. Because Megumi's entire logic was, to beat you doesn't mean I have to reach your level. Anyway, I apologize for this really long-winded intro, but let's actually get into advancing the 10 Shadows technique as a whole. Hey you! Yeah, you, I'm here to hook you up with some really good anime merch and merch for comic book lovers. Now, do you love Jujutsu Kaisen, Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, Bleach, Marvel, DC, and all of the above, and do you have your own nerd stuff that you're into? Well, I got some good stuff for you today, as our friends at Fandominion are here to hook you up because they got the best merch. If you've been around here for a while, you'll know that they've been with our channel for a long time. So you can take it from me that they got good merch and they will hook you up with the highest quality merch. After all, I really recommend them. They got some really good merch, and I'm gonna hook you all up with something special. If you use the code TEF, really simple, really easy to remember, made it simple for all y'all, you get a 10% discount. Yeah, that's right, a 10% discount for all the merch you could possibly buy. And I guarantee you, you'll be happy with whatever you get. So, you guys make some money, I'll give you a discount, I make some money, we all get happy. Hope you all enjoy, and let's continue on with the rest of the video. Remember to check out Fandomian. Link in the description down below, as well as our code. Now, advancing the 10 Shadows technique is going to be insanely difficult because the 10 Shadows technique is overall a really hard technique, purely because of one simple fact with the 10 Shadows. While you do start out with 2 of the dogs, you also have to tame every single one of the Shikigami, but you are able to use the other Shikigami to help you in taming the Shikigami. And the Shikigami do grow stronger with the user themselves, with the potential exception being Maharaga, because Maharaga is just overall weird. And for those of you who want proof of the Shikigami do growing with the user, this is a direct statement from Mahito to Junpei that Junpei's Shikigami will grow with him and get stronger as he grows, so that's likely the case for all Shikigami, because I don't see why Mahito would make a specific Junpei example if it was only limited to Junpei and how he would even know that, which is why it's likely the case with all Shikigami. So this 10 Shadows user is going to need to have an extremely good mentality to growing. Because unlike Megumi Fushiguro, who has an issue for growing of he is very much a team player, and on top of that he thinks he's able to solve every single issue at the cost of his life, at least for the early parts of Jujutsu Kaisen, this 10 Shadows user is not going to have that issue. After all, they grew up in the Zenin clan, and they're going to have pride in themselves because they have the treasure technique. So they are not going to have that mentality. Instead, they're going to have a much more growth-based mentality, where they're going to want to make sure to figure out every single aspect of the 10 Shadows, of the treasure technique, in order to push it to its potential at a point that has never been seen before, to even do things like surpass the Heian era. This level of mentality should allow the 10 Shadows to grow even faster. Stack that with the fact that we're going to place them on a bunch of missions that are going to push them to their limits, and immediately teach them the principles of the Black Flash in hopes that they might land one or a few in order to amplify themselves even further. As it's directly stated, after you land the first Black Flash, there's a massive difference between sorcerers who can land the Black Flash and who can't. Then it's immediately going to help this sorcerer get much stronger, and as a result of that, get the Divine Dogs much stronger in the process. However, they're still going to be training on their off time as well, which is where the second part of the training is going to come in order to make them even more powerful. They are going to funnel the amount of curse energy they are not using in a mission midway, usually right before they go to sleep. Like, I can imagine this being like an hour routine into creating a curse tool, similar to that of the Dark Edge sword that Megumi has access to, but just to keep infusing curse energy into a weapon. That way, even when they themselves aren't fighting, their curse energy itself doesn't go to waste and ends up getting put into a weapon for them to utilize further in order to make them strike even harder than they already do. Now, this curse tool is going to be very, very important later on into the video, but it will not be important right now. So for now, just put this in your mind right now that they do have a sword that has their curse energy infused into it. Now, with this setup, with the likely chance they've eventually landed a Black Flash, from their mindset being one of the better ones in Jujutsu Kaisen, from them having a curse tool, from them constantly training, as well as making sure to get stronger and push themselves on mission, I could see this easily being a grade 1 level sorcerer, but we're not done yet. After all, this video is about the 10 shadows, and I see it being very likely by this point they do have several of the shadows tamed directly by themselves. After all, if Megumi was able to at the start of the series somehow both have Nue and Orochi tamed, and then later on get Elephant tamed before he even awakened his domain, then this sorcerer is most definitely going to be able to tame all 3 of those Shikigami, as well as Rabbit Escape. They also would have Morning Tiger tame, but we have no idea what that thing even does because we barely see it fight. So I'm going to pretend for the sake of this video it doesn't exist. And for the sake of this video, we're just going to pretend the white dog is the 10th shadow and not actually this, purely because it really doesn't make any difference either way. This is when we're going to begin another one of the plans, because I see it being very likely though that one of the 2 dogs died, because while these dogs are definitely going to be stronger than the ones in canon, it won't be enough to keep up with the strong amount of opponents and foes the sorcerer is going to have to fight on these missions. The stronger curses that are going to keep getting upgraded and upgraded, which is going to result in likely one of them dying. And this is where we're going to take advantage of one of the functions of totality. Now, it does seem to be implied totality does take a little bit of time for it to actually finish fusing the Shikigami together. Around a month or so, based on how much time it took for the Shikigami to fuse and show itself off in Goodwill, because Megumi doesn't show them until later on in Goodwill, despite how useful Divine Totality would likely be against Todo. As well as Nue and Orochi not fusing until literally Sukuna takes over his body. So instead, we're going to actually increase the time it takes for the totality to fuse together. Doing this for the likes of a Binding Vow, because we know you can use Binding Vows to do things like hold off your curse energy, as Nanami does in order to buff himself when he's in overtime mode, and because this offers such a huge risk to the user of it because they won't have access to a powerful Shikigami that when it was resummoned by Megumi was capable of damaging the likes of Hanami, one of the most durable curse spirits in all Jujutsu Kaisen, and it's going to be in the hands of a much stronger user. This is going to be quite heavy risk, but at the same time, once they are finished totalitying together, it will make Divine Totality that much stronger because we decided to make it take that much more time through the likes of a Binding Vow. During this time, the 10 Shadows user is going to both train and continue to experiment with their technique, getting stronger and stronger until the dog is ready. I can also see it being very likely that they're going to be able to tame the bull and the deer during this time frame as well, especially the deer because the deer hasn't really shown any combat abilities and the bull is kind of really easy to counter, like literally just fight it in a range because the bull can only run in a straight direction, and yeah, you can tame it pretty easily in my opinion. Through experimentation, though, they're going to end up finding about the 2 special other qualities of the 10 Shadows, which is the ability to both go inside of the 10 Shadows as well as drag other people into the 10 Shadows and store things in the 10 Shadows, as well as partial totality, which partial totality is basically using traits of Shikigami to create much weaker Shikigami, but they still have the same abilities. And this is going to be where we really start advancing the technique, because so far I've only really created a really strong 10 Shadows user, but now we're about to go really ham. Now there is something I really want to heavily establish. Partial totality doesn't seem to take that much curse energy, considering the fact that Megumi creates basically, I think, somewhere around 9 Toad Shikigami in the fight against Todo that each have the wings. They definitely don't take a lot of curse energy, especially for someone who's going to already have a stronger base than Megumi Fushiguro and have more curse energy than him. So keep that in mind when we get to the insane stuff I'm about to say. I'm about to push Binding Vows like I have never ever pushed them before because we're about to go nuts. So up first, we're going to combine 2 Shikigami in particular, which those 2 Shikigami are going to be the Rabbit and Nue itself. to make a partial totality of that, to make basically bunnies that have sparks coming off of it. And I already know what you might be thinking. Eternal Flame, partial totalities are overall just much weaker than the normal Shikigami. This won't really do much. Normally, I'd agree with you on that. However, this is when binding vows come in. Now, you all know Mei, right? And Mei's main move of Bird Strike, where Bird Strike is an incredibly powerful move. A move that Sukuna, Kenny, and Gojo all want to make sure they don't get hit by. A move so strong, it's capable of basically one-shotting a special grade curse that could have been amped by Kenny even further because of his curse energy. All in exchange for a measly crow's life. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel this Shikigami would likely have more firepower if its life was sacrificed than a crow would, between the combination of Nue and Rabbit Escape. Of course, they aren't the true 10 shadows, so overall they would be much weaker than, let's say, if we were to sacrifice Nue directly. However, I still feel that they would likely be stronger than a crow, if not just on the same level as Bird Strike as a whole. But the importance of this is you can use multiple of these Shikigami, not just one, which is where it's going to end up becoming even more powerful and even more broken. So imagine several of these Shikigami that you're sacrificing the lives of that are just partial totalities and they do no effect to the real technique because they are partial, and then they just explode with this similar to Bird Strike level of damage on an opponent, and it's just several of them considering how dangerous just one Bird Strike has shown itself to be. Furthermore, if partial totality is still able to use the abilities of the original Shikigami, which I see no reason that it wouldn't be able to, these life-sacrificing bunnies would be able to make clones of themselves that could also sacrifice their own lives, that would keep bombarding people with several hundreds of these attacks. It just would go absolutely nuts, and I feel so bad for whoever would get hit by it, because it fixes one of the main weaknesses Bird Strike overall has, which is its rarity to hit, because of how many bunnies we can see from Rabbit Escape, because there are so many rabbits that come from Rabbit Escapes. Now, if you don't think that Rabbit Escape can actually sacrifice the clones of themselves in order to make a life-sacrificing binding vow, then that's fine. However, I do want to point out that is a possibility nonetheless, so I'm talking about that here and now. Now, this is where we're going to get to our next set of binding vows. Not every single Shikigami is used in every single fight, which is something a lot of people have noticed, me and myself included, which is where we're going to take advantage of that, because we're also not going to have every single Shikigami out in the field. We're going to place a binding vow on the likes of Gamma as well as Round Deer in order to not allow them to exit our shadow, other than for a few specific parts of them that I'm going to get into now. For Gamma, the only part of Gamma that'll be able to exit this shadow is going to be its tongue, and by extension of that, it will end up gaining a massive buff. Now, this tongue is insanely fast. When it was on the weaker partial Shikigami, it was able to move Megumi out of the way of Toto's hits, so Toto was completely blitzing him before. And when it was Gamma himself, in the anime, Gamma allowed Megumi to dodge Toji of all people. So basically, take this stronger Gamma, because it'd be on a stronger user, and amp it up by a binding vow that only permits its tongue to leave the shadows and not actually its body itself. Now, I'm going to be honest, I forgot about Orochi, but Orochi is also permanently staying in the shadow. It's not just those two I talked about, which will, by extension, also give Orochi a buff. Orochi is already strong enough in the extremely early arcs to literally lift Sukuna into the air. Now, Sukuna wasn't fighting back against it, but it still has quite a bit of power nonetheless. And both of these Shikigami are going to have a very, very unique role, which that unique role is going to be one of two things. Either A, to bring the user themselves into the shadow and launch them around, or B, and this is going to be the more important role, to bring other people into the shadow and literally drown them in the shadow. We know it's possible to drown people in the shadows, because that was a way that Megumi could have taken out Reggie, because there is no oxygen to breathe in the shadow. Sack that if we use partial totality to create smaller, weaker versions of them with binding out limitations that don't allow them to exit the shadow, and you get up an insane shadow combo that would wipe out a lot of people. Now, I know what you guys might be saying. Isn't this strategy very counterproductive to keeping Round Deer inside of the shadows? I would agree with you if it wasn't for the fact that we literally see the shadows are kind of like an ocean in terms of size. Like, the user's shadow in comparison to the shadow itself is actually kind of nuts in comparison to how big it actually is. So, yeah. Like, Maharaga is literally able to hop out of Sukuna's shadow and actually fit in there, which is absolutely insane. Anyway, the purpose of keeping Round Deer inside of the 10 shadows will be in case you need a really quick restore, you can just dip inside the shadows, fully restore yourself, and then dip out. Because Round Deer has straight up shown healing capabilities, so even if you don't have RCT and this user doesn't have RCT, then they do have the healing Round Deer, which can just hop into the shadow, heal themselves, and then hop out. Now remember how I talked about this sword? This is where the sword actually comes in to be a little bit more important for situations where the user can't actually hop into the shadows. We find out something extremely interesting through Nanami Kento in the most recent chapter, which is the fact that curse tools that you have used for a long while can get your curse technique infused into them, and this is where this sword comes in. We're going to stick this sword into the shadows for a long while to let it seep in there while using it constantly with 10 shadows, in order to make sure that the sword itself has some parts of the 10 shadows technique. Now we don't know in full degree how it functions, but this should very much be possible nonetheless. This will allow this sword to be an access point for the shadows for the user themselves, and the most important part of it is it'll basically allow the user, if they want to, fully regenerate themselves by accessing the shadows if they're unable to dip into the shadows just by touching the blade. Furthermore, it could have things like lightning properties like Kamutoke due to Nue being a lightning Shikigami. Now, it probably wouldn't be as powerful as Kamutoke, but it could certainly still have lightning properties. Or it could have the ability to shoot out water thanks to Max Elephant. But most of all, it could have a pretty insane ability of the sword being able to drag people into the shadows as well, which would catch a lot of people off guard and make the sword even more powerful for the user to use, and be a kind of permanent way of infusing 10 shadows into the clan forever. Now there's one more aspect of 10 shadows that we're very much going to end up taking advantage of, which is the ability to manifest traits of the Shikigami and actually fire those out. Gojo, in the battle against Gojo, Sukuna was capable of manifesting Maximum Elephant's water without even summoning Maximum Elephant and then compressing it down into that of a piercing blood-like attack, which our channel has come to call Piercing Aqua, by the way. So yeah, we're going to learn how to use that and how to manifest several of the Shikigami's abilities, such as both Max Elephant as well as Nue, and how to manifest those abilities, because firing a water arrow with lightning coming off of it, that would do some massive damage to a lot of people. Or even filling the area with water without even needing to summon Max Elephant and then electrocuting the water, shocking whatever's inside of it. That would be an absolutely terrifying combo. Now you might be wondering, why am I going this far? Why am I doing all of this, and how is this going to counter a 6+ plus limitless user? Well, I'm going to be 100% real with you guys. The last 15 minutes I just spent in order to make plans to counter Maharaga and actually beat Maharaga. I wasn't even focused on the 6+ plus limitless user. This is how far a 10 shadows user would need to go in order to actually beat Maharaga, which is absolutely nuts and just speaks to how strong Maharaga is. And even then, I'm not entirely confident this would work alone, so we're going to add in another plan, which is just going to be Piercing Bull running for a long while before we do summon Maharaga, and the moment we summon Maharaga, Piercing Bull is going to slam into him, and then several life-sacrificing partial totalities are going to slam into Maharaga as well, with lightning exploding, all in an effort to kill him. If this doesn't work, I don't know what will, but I'm leaving that up to you if you guys do think that would work or not. However, now we're going to get into how they would fight the 6-size user without Maharaga. And in order for them to stand a chance, they're going to need a domain expansion, and this is where we're going to get into the perfected version of a 10 Shadows domain expansion. Now thankfully we already know what a sure hit of a domain Shikigami would actually look like in Jujutsu Kaisen, because Dagon is a Shikigami user, and that is the sure hit infused into his technique, where Dagon's sure hit allows the Shikigami to instantly appear on an opponent's body. Now, while against most people this would definitely be enough to take them out, it is more than likely possible that the 6-size plus limitless user is going to have access to a domain expansion of their own, and that is where we're going to include even more binding vows into the 10 Shadows domain expansion. After all, the 6-size plus limitless domain will probably be extremely refined because of how the 6-size even functions, so it'll be insanely difficult to just reach that level normally through training. Of course, it's still possible to be able to clash with it and reach it normally, but we don't have time for that. Now, we know it's possible to weaken certain attributes in order to strengthen other attributes within a domain expansion. For example, Gojo was capable of swapping the inside and exterior barriers, making the inside weak to attacks and the outside of it strong against attacks. That's one way to make it stronger. Another way to make it stronger, though, is to limit aspects of the sure hit attack and make it less and less dangerous. For example, Hakari Kinji's sure hit of his domain is just explaining the rules to you, which makes it excellent in Tug of War specifically. I'm going to put the translation from King of Lightning up on screen now, thanks to King of Lightning, because this was actually the proper translation, this just wasn't included in the manga. However, Hakari's domain is much stronger in Tug of Wars. This is because of the nature of the sure hit, so we're going to do something very similar by limiting the amount of Shikigami that can actually appear, or limiting the specific types of Shikigami that can be utilized as the sure hit within the domain. Now, the specific Shikigami we're going to limit to this is we will not be able to use Totality, Max Elephant, as well as Piercing Ox. Now this should offer a suitable boost for the 10 Shadows domain. Furthermore, the domain is also going to be a little bit different from Megumi, where instead of it being 2 people standing on shadows, it's going to be both of them inside of a shadow. So, while the opponent is getting hit by sure hits, they also have to deal with the fact they are now drowning in shadows and unable to breathe inside this domain, which the user themselves will not be affected by this issue. Furthermore, the user might also be capable of summoning shadow clones either to take hits or to drag someone even deeper into the shadows and continue to drown them. Most of all, even if the domain clash doesn't work and it ends up breaking both domains, they can use the sword or just round deer as a whole to heal themselves and heal their brain back to normal and do it again. Because the sword is not them. The sword has their curse technique infused into them, and they are not them themselves, so the sword would be able to heal them in the process. So the brain cooldown wouldn't exactly be an issue for them either for after you use a curse technique, for you to be able to use the sword to recover your curse technique even faster. And well, that was about everything I could actually think about for adding to the 10 Shadows in order to utilize its full potential. Without, of course, talking about Maharaga and that type of stuff, because I have another entire video talking about Maharaga and how strong a Maharaga complete totality would be. So yeah, basically imagine this 10 Shadows user, but with Maharaga and everything else I talked about, and you end up with an insanely powerful 10 Shadows user. Now, how strong this 10 Shadows user would be, I'm not entirely certain right now, but I do certainly think they'd be in the top 5. If they actually did exist in Jujutsu Kaisen. But I wanted to hear what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you guys think on this entire 10 Shadows user? Do you think most of this stuff is possible? Do you think I'm reaching just a little bit? I don't know. I want to hear what you guys think in the comment section down below. Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today we are here to discuss the full potential of 3 of the 4 disaster curses, the elemental trio, Dagon, Jogo, and Hanami. Now you might be wondering, why am I not including Mahito in this entire video? But that's because Mahito doesn't really fit in with the others because his powers aren't exactly elemental based, unlike the other 3s who are. However, today we're going to be discovering what the full potential of all 3 of them are and turning them into absolute calamities. So without further ado, let's actually get into this. Now, up first, before I go over each curses and their abilities and how to advance their abilities, I want to go over the mindset change that we're going to be going into with each of the curses, because each of them, in my opinion, have a mindset change they need to make in order to really optimize on their potential fully. The first one being Hanami, who we're going to go over first in this video, where Hanami's mindset change that they really need to do is getting more in touch with nature, using more and more plants and more elements of nature that already exist. Which that I'm about to go more in depth with later into the video. With Dagon, we don't really need to make much of a mindset change to him, same with Hanami, because Hanami kind of already started to make a good mindset change that they made during their battle against Yuji and Todo. Same with Dagon. Dagon already seems to have a really good mindset based on what we know. However, what Dagon really needs to improve upon is the ocean knowledge and what he uses in the ocean. And up next is Jogo, who Jogo needs to have a much more growth-based mindset, similar to that of Mahito's, where he doesn't care what happens to him so long as he can keep growing, as something that Sukuna had directly called out from Jogo as his best way to improve. So for this video, we're going to go in the order that the curses died. However, we are going to have a little bit of chapters in the description that you can use in order to go to each respective curse that you want to go to. So we're first going to go over Hanami, then we're going to go over Dagon, and then finally we're going to go over Jogo at the end. So without further ado, let's get straight into this. Now up first, before we do talk about how to advance Hanami's abilities, I'm going to talk a little bit about Hanami's pre-existing abilities so we can have a basis of where to go from there. Hanami is the wielder of the curse technique known as Disaster Plants, which allows them to manifest wood and plants to use against different opponents in several different ways, both in terms of offense and support. For example, they are capable of making giant roots. They can travel throughout the roots as well as make them disappear if needed. He is also capable of making wooden balls like several projectiles to use against opponents. They are capable of making curse energy buds, which when curse energy buds launch onto people, they're able to drain their curse energy and grow as a result of that. And then finally, the Flower Field ability, where Hanami creates a circle that traps opponents within a field of flowers that takes away their desire to fight. This is very useful for catching people off guard, as well as being able to combo with other attacks if the opponent is not fast enough to react to this. Finally, there's Hanami's domain expansion, which we don't really know what the domain expansion does unless you use the video game, where the video game implies that the domain expansion drains the energy of opponents as well as drains it into the sunflower on Hanami's arm that allows him to fire a giant laser cannon. Now, while Hanami most definitely has a massive moveset, there is a lot of improvements that we can make that center around two separate things, which the first thing is just around Hanami's general moveset, and more so combining a lot of the moves as well as combining them with principles we already know about JJK in order to advance Hanami's moveset. And then the second way to advance Hanami's moveset massively is to get much more specific with the flowers. There's an issue that Hanami has, which is they are not specific enough with the flowers they use. They just use general types of trees and general types of plants. However, there are much more useful plants which I'm going to get into a little bit later in this section. First, I just want to focus on the different amount of combinations that we know that Hanami could do just off of these existing abilities alone, such as having the Cursed Bud flower be infused to the vines themselves, effectively using the vines as a way to allow them to have different spots they can aim just to catch people off guard. Furthermore, we do know people are more likely to already try and climb the vines like how Todo and Yuji did, so just imagine placing these midway through the vines, or as the vines are launching out at opponents and these giant wood spears are launching out at opponents, you make the Cursed Buds rise out and just immediately launch out at an opponent while they're already having to deal with this massive wood spike launching out at you. Just add even more pressure and even more mobility to a pretty overpowered ability that is like the Cursed Buds. Similar to the previous ability for Hanami, I would also put the flower fields on the wood spikes. That way you're able to make mobile flower fields, because from what we can tell, Hanami is only able to make them rise out from the ground. However, he was able to do this through his wood instead, which there's no reason why he shouldn't be able to do this through his wood instead, and it would help with one of the primary weaknesses, where if someone realizes on time, they're able to move out the way. So if they're immediately pacified, you can immediately land the move after, rather than having a step in between. Basically, make the pacifying ability an attack at the same time, because it's stuck to an attack. I am going to focus a little bit on the flower field for a little bit because the next ability also has to do with the flower field. You know how Hanami is able to create wood balls? Effectively use the wood balls to carry some of the flowers from the flower field in order to just cast the flower field if the wood balls do end up missing, or if they even land on an opponent, because that will allow you to have a ranged version of the flower field rather than you just having to raise your arm up to activate it, because it's implied that that's the way that Hanami does it. But if there are other ways to activate it, such as using the wood balls, it would allow them to also spread it out and just create a massive amount of flower fields they could then have wood attacks rise out from. In exchange, I put a binding vow on it that would make it very easy to destroy if it's hit, because most people are going to see these little wood orbs flying at you and immediately go for dodging it instead of actually destroying it. So in exchange, you take advantage of the fact that most people are going to be caught off guard by it, and bam, you have flower fields that are placed all around that are even more potent thanks to the result of a binding vow. Another one that's pretty simple that I'm surprised Hanami doesn't do is having multiple Cursed Bud flowers rise up from the ground to attack opponents. They are very clearly not that cursed energy draining, considering Hanami was able to use that ability twice while also using several other abilities in the entirety of the Goodwill Festival arc. So why not take advantage of the fact that you can make several of these Cursed Buds and make sure they are guaranteed to hit rather than dodge, because of the fact they do drain cursed energy. So this would just be an extremely useful way to overwhelm opponents and overwhelm them with too many attacks at once. The next ability is actually an ability that's inspired from 7 Deadly Sins from a character known as King, where effectively it's using their domain expansion Sure Hit without actually using their domain expansion to cast the Sure Hit. Now, this is primarily a long-ranged ability. However, the user effectively makes a massive sunflower in the background that's charging off of the natural life around them in order to make a massive beam of energy that then fires on an opponent. This is something that would likely require several binding vows. It already has one binding vow in place, because we do know from Shibuya that if you are able to place a totem for a barrier in the most obvious place possible, because this is what the sorcerers do, it makes the barrier that much stronger. Stacked on top of the fact that this is a very obvious flower and a likely time-based charging binding vow, as well as needing natural life around you, and you can just make this a super powerful attack for if it does land on an opponent. You can also use the wood to make sure an opponent is entrapped inside of an area so that this attack does actually land. Furthermore, since Hanami is based on nature, it should also be possible to add in that they can get charged from the sun, because I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to do photosynthesis, because Hanami is literally a plant. As the final nail in the coffin for all of Hanami's already existing applications and how to advance them, take advantage of the fact that Hanami is basically able to warp through the vines by making small vines all across the area, and then just rise up and uppercut people. Use small vines as a method of transport, because Hanami has a very bad issue, which is the fact that they are kinda slow, at least in comparison to the other disaster curses. However, if you use the vines as transportation, it would help a lot. But this is only talking about advancing their already existing applications. Now we're going to talk about new applications that they can create, which the first application is going to be based around Shikigami, where the first Shikigami that I have in mind in order to give Hanami is one based around ends. These would purely be combat-based Shikigami in order to support Hanami in combat and fight alongside him. After all, there's not something that's more fitting than literal Ents and tree guardians to help fight alongside the cursed spirit of nature itself. These Ents could likely be made through a binding vow where it involves having to cut down trees and fusing them together in order to make these massive golems in order to assist Hanami in combat. These would primarily be close range combatants, but that fits very well with Hanami since he can either also join them in close range, or while these Ents are attacking, he can use any of his other long range based attacks in order to allow the Ents to basically jump Jujutsu Kaisen another person, because Hanami has a big flaw of they're kind of only one individual fighter. We also know that creating a large amount of Shikigami all at once is not really a struggle for cursed spirits at all, especially of this level, because of how many Dagon is actually able to use and shown off at once. So it makes a lot of sense that Hanami will be able to create this many Shikigami as well and just have these utilized in combat to help him out. Furthermore, Hanami could create specific types of combat-based Ents, where they all have different types of weapons. For example, Hanami could convert one of their weapons to be a hammer, one to be a blade, one to be a spear. He could even make archer-based Ents in order to help him out in the background as well, and if he needs to, he can likely use his own technique in order to change the shape of their arms or change the shape of their bodies. Furthermore, you can even take advantage of binding vows by making some of the Ent Shikigami weaker that are ranged based in order to make it so their attacks are even more powerful. After all, we know this is something capable of being done since Mahito had done it with the transfigured humans. Even taking advantage of the fact that the Shikigami are mobile by placing cursed buds on them and the ability to launch out cursed buds is also a very good way to use them, effectively using the Shikigami as extensions of the cursed buds and making them even more mobile other than just making them rise out from the ground to add another extra layer of pressure that can be added against opponents. Another way that Hanami could potentially advance their moveset is by creating Shikigami based around the Cursed Bud move, where the Shikigami take advantage of the Cursed Bud's natural ability to drain the Cursed energy of whatever they are touching. However, there could be a binding vow placed on said Shikigami, which forces the Shikigami's only way of growing in power and being able to actually fight and have energy is via draining the life of others, where effectively this Shikigami ignores the entire rule that most Shikigami have of them getting stronger with the caster, instead centering around being able to drain the energy from others instead, and thus getting a binding vow because it has even more risk because it requires Hanami actually defeating a person and then effectively trapping that person in a cocoon and turning that cocoon into energy for them to drain. I'd also see the Shikigami likely being based around a moth in terms of shape purely because of the cocoon aesthetic. However, that's only going over Shikigami like Ents in order to be main attackers. There are even more Shikigami we can go over that can assist. For example, creating Shikigami that are based on insects, some of the most common creatures that are spotted within the woods. This is not something that's outside of a curse's potential of doing. After all, we see Jogo, a curse that's not even associated with nature, if not the direct opposite of it, create amber insects. So a cursed spirit like Hanami, who is much more associated with nature, should be able to have an even better grasp, as well as be able to create even more potent variants of insects just because of the fact they are more associated with nature than Jogo. Such as creating a massive wasp hive, where wasps are launched out as Shikigami at opponents. However, to make these wasps even more overpowered and even stronger, I have in mind two specific binding vows for these specific types of wasps. Where the first binding vow is that they aren't actually all that powerful and all that strong. However, each time a wasp is killed, another one just spawns in the place of the hive, where the only way to actually kill the wasps is by putting down the wasp hive. Furthermore, you could design the Shikigami themselves to have a poison-based system based on naturally found poisons in forest. You could also have support-type Shikigami which are made purely out of wood in order to substitute the parts of the Shikigami that end up getting broken in order to basically fuse them together and help them regenerate. Basically like the Hulkbuster armor, but instead of it being metal, it's plants. However, this is where we're going to get into the second aspect of Hanami, where the first aspect was us talking about how to make Hanami's moveset even more diverse, but now we're going to go into specifics of what Hanami should have access to since they have full-on access to flower creation, as well as wood creation. So get your nerd glasses on, everybody, because you're about to learn about some flowers today that can kill you. The first flower that I would like to talk about that would be extremely useful for Hanami, which is known as the Nerium Oleander. I am probably butchering that name, so I can't wait to get corrected by the one flower expert that might actually exist and find this video randomly. If you do, I actually want to know if I'm actually saying it right, because I have no idea. Anyways, this is a plant that is extremely dangerous, down to the point from its root to its sap, that even touching it or breathing it in is extremely dangerous for people. Furthermore, we also know that not every sorcerer can actually heal off poisons. It requires a pretty high-end level of RCT to even be able to heal off poisons, so this is going to work extremely well against most sorcerers. Now just imagine summoning an entire massive field of these flowers, or even existing in these fields of flowers and getting touched by them or breathing it in is going to be deadly for you just because of how many of them there are. Stack that on top of the fact that the opponent is going to need to use RCT repeatedly in order to recover off of the poison. So at worst case scenario, you just have to drain them off of energy using these extremely poisonous flowers. There's also the other issue of every single sorcerer we have ever seen needs to breathe. So this can be deadly to anybody around, and even if you do destroy them, A, Hanami can just create more of these flowers. It shouldn't be that hard for them considering they can create an entire flower field. B, if you end up destroying them, guess what? You can make even more of them spread and make it even more difficult for you to actually survive because it even spreads even faster since they're being destroyed. There are also other deadly plants too, like the deadly nightshade, by far and away one of the most deadly flowers to ever exist, and has the ability to cause hallucinations before causing death. You know Hanami's flower field, right? Imagine these, but instead of it being that you're now in a hallucination where you're pacified and you're going to die. Because here's the thing about Hanami's flower field, right? We see Hanami summon so many flowers that if they were to want to, they could just add these to the cascade of flowers in the flower field. There are just so many deadly flowers that Hanami could use in order to access even more abilities. Furthermore, they would be amped by cursed energy. They wouldn't just be the normal, already existing deadly flowers to people. And I'm just saying this, an amped up poison as well as an amped up pacifying field that you're in is a very nasty combo for anybody. That's basically like a sure hit without a domain. You know, something that only Kashimo was capable of, so yeah, just think about having to fight in that. Oh, and also while Hanami is still attacking you with several wood golems, and themselves, and their massive amount of range attacks, and charging up a sunflower in the background getting ready to solar beam you. But I'm not even done there yet. Hanami could also make it an attack where all the flowers are simultaneously destroyed upon being made, just to release the poisons across the air for everyone to breathe. Hanami won't be affected by it. It's their own poisons. They should be fine. They're the literal embodiment of nature. They're creating it. However, the opponents, on the other hand, well, they're going to have to deal with that while they're getting bombarded with more and more of Hanami's attacks. They could even potentially make a Shikigami that's entire purpose is spreading these flowers across the field, while Hanami and his own Shikigami are just jumping an opponent and they have to deal with this massive setup of a trap, while there's also just a giant sunbeam in the background charging. However, I'm not even done there. Because that was just me talking about the flowers, which by the way, I'm not going to talk about the mushrooms because y'all should know what shrooms can do. I'm not going to talk about what shrooms can do. Now we're going to talk about wood. This is going to be by far and away my biggest pause moment of an entire video because I'm just going to spend a little bit talking about wood. Which is method in order to improve Hanami's wood-based attacks is actually to use just more durable and more powerful wood. It's actually just straight up pretty simple. Because from what we can tell, Hanami has only really used common types of wood. Now, it might be possible that Hanami is not actually able to create more durable types of woods, because while I am pretty certain Hanami can create different flower types, him being able to create different types of wood because they're manifestations of his cursed technique, they're not actually manipulating it, is a little bit unclear, but it could be possible that he could still create more durable and better types of wood. If he's able to do that, he could use that to coat himself and amp himself as well. Basically, imagine Mahito's true form, but instead of Mahito's true form being flesh, Mahito's true form as wood, while also being able to manipulate that wood in different shapes in order to help amplify their attacks even further. Stack that with the fact that they already are going to be overwhelming people and using these tree type materials in creating the Shikigami and just everything that we've already given Hanami, I do think we have upgraded Hanami quite massively. Now, I wouldn't say Hanami is on the levels of Gojo and Sukuna or that high, but I do think that this Hanami would be capable of tussling with and throwing hands with the heavy hitters of Jujutsu High. So I think we did massively advance Hanami's skill set considering what Hanami was at previously. However, that's about everything that I can think of for Hanami, so I want to hear you guys in the comment section down below about Hanami and how to advance him, because now we're going to be moving on to Dagon. And now we're getting into Dagon after we're done with Hanami, and if you cannot tell, I absolutely love Dagon, I absolutely love water manipulation. It is by far and away one of the most underrated powers in my opinion. But anyways, if you cannot tell, this is probably going to be the longest or the second longest section in this entire video. I'm not entirely sure since I'm actually recording these in order, so editing you will be able to tell, or you guys will be able to tell in the future. However, I feel Dagon, unlike Hanami, really didn't get to show off much of his kit, mainly because he didn't have an over-accentuated several chapter-long fight, where he did actually get to show off how he does in a fight. Because unlike Hanami, who Hanami has the issue of we don't know what their domain is unless we look at the video game, Dagon has the opposite issue, where we mainly see their domain and we don't actually know what they can do outside of a domain in a fight. Because we do see their applications of water manipulation, we don't actually see much of their applications of water manipulation, which is now when we're going to get into Dagon's actual technique and describing what it can do. Dagon's base technique is known as Disaster Tides, which allows him to release and control a large amount of water, which he showed off the ability to turn it into a shield. Furthermore, he can pull that water right back into himself, allowing him to consume whoever gets stuck inside of the water. Finally, he has shown off the ability to create a massive amount of Shikigami, and when I say a massive amount, I mean a literal massive amount down to the point where he can make a wave of them that make himself look kinda small in comparison. So this part of the video we're going to split into several chunks. The first section of this video is going to be about creating new water manipulation applications in order to give Dagon, where I'm going to give my inspiration for some of them, which is mainly going to be Avatar, because Avatar has a lot of good water manipulation applications. Where the second part of this video is going to be centered around creating applications based on what you should be capable of doing with water manipulation, which this in particular is going to be the fun part. And then the final part is going to be around creating Shikigami both based on real life sea creatures, because real life has some terrifying sea creatures, as well as sea creatures that are based on myths and rumors. After all, Dagon is based around the fear of the ocean, and as he has shown, he is not just limited to water manipulation, but also the Shikigami that he can create. And our final section of this video is going to be a lot more of a hypothetical section, where we're going to give Dagon powers from creatures that exist inside of the sea, and not just limited to the Shikigami that he can create. The reason why I feel this is appropriate is because Dagon represents the fear of the ocean itself, and not just the fear of water. But up first, we're going to go with water manipulation applications. Now, Dagon has already displayed a really good ability to control water, which should set up all of these other abilities I'm going to talk about, which that ability he showed off is the ability to manipulate the water to be more of a shield, which just straight up shows off the ability to pressurize the water as well as change the shape of the water to be more fitting of a shield. Oh, and before I forget this, because I literally just forgot to mention it earlier, Dagon does have the ability to fly, because that is something important. The first application that I had in mind for Dagon is the ability to create water bullets, both small and large. Because of the fact that Dagon has already shown off the ability to fire out large waves of water, why not create projectiles that are all based on water, made to be incredibly small, but by extension have large amounts of speed, so when they hit an opponent, they splash onto an opponent. Furthermore, by creating a large wave of water bullets, it would make it harder to dodge thanks to the massive amount of attacks coming at an opponent. And on top of that, Dagon does have the ability to manipulate that water once it lands on an opponent, which is where the next part of this ability is going to come through, as this ability is actually inspired by Hanami's Cursed Buds ability. However, rather than draining the opponent of cursed energy, the water is going to manipulate and change into something like spikes in order to spike into an opponent and cause damage even after landing, effectively sticking onto them. Furthermore, Dagon might be able to even use the water that's currently on them to slightly redirect their movements in order to make it even easier for them to fight against the opponent and set their own movements off guard, allowing him to land even more hits on opponents. Furthermore, Dagon could also implement that into his Shikigami as well, allowing his Shikigami to fire out bursts of water in order to add even more pressure to opponents for Dagon to have more water that he can manipulate around against opponents. Effectively in a similar method to how Choso does his own blood manipulation, where he covers the area in blood and manipulates that blood by bringing the blood back to himself, but instead of it just being Choso and his blood he creates, it's going to be Dagon with his massive amounts of water. Speaking of Choso, we're going to take even more inspiration off of Choso now. We're going to take inspiration off of Choso's move of Supernova, where Supernova works via compressing a large amount of blood before having it explode on an opponent and hit an opponent. Where instead of doing this with blood, we're going to do this with water, and we're going to do this with a large amount of water at that, which is going to be a lot easier for Dagon considering the massive amounts of water that Dagon has shown the capability of creating in the past. The next move we're going to give access to Dagon is a move that comes inspired from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is the Water Cloak move, which is what Katara used against Azula, where effectively we're going to have Dagon surround himself completely in water, allowing him to have much more reach with water, giving him water-like tentacles to attack people from a distance, and making it just overall much harder to reach Dagon. Now, this move does have a weakness to lightning-based attacks, mainly because of the fact you're just surrounding your body in water. However, there are only really two characters that actually have lightning attacks, which will be very effective against this. Otherwise, this is actually very useful. Stack that on top of the fact that Dagon is already known to have incredible amounts of HP, and you give them this massive shield they can have over them, which makes it even harder to reach them, and it's just even better. Another method of water manipulation that would be extremely useful for Dagon is Dagon utilizing his water abilities for movement, such as launching high pressure water pillars out from his feet as well as out from his back in order to propel him even further. He can already fly, so adding even more extra speed to this would make him even more of a physical threat than he already is. Another method that could be even more useful is creating large waves of water and just adding and pumping more and more water into it in order to start drowning more and more opponents. Because rather than making the water come back to Dagon in order to consume people, if they're able to fill the room with water, and water already being incredibly heavy as it is, it'll make it harder for characters to actually breathe and fight against Dagon on the inside. Especially considering the fact that Dagon is one of the only few characters who are not actually nerfed by water, and not everyone else can actually move at normal speeds in water. Furthermore, by filling areas with water and keeping the water around, Dagon can manipulate that water that people are now stuck inside of, effectively creating a domain sure hit without having the domain active because there is so much water filling an area that there's no way to escape the hits. On top of the idea of Dagon already filling rooms and areas with water, Dagon would also be able to spin the water around, effectively forcing his opponent to constantly have to move or move against the water, making it even easier for Dagon to fight while he also manipulates the water in order to assist his own movements inside of it, effectively making the water his perfect fighting area while also making the water his opponent's worst nightmare. Now this does have the issue of this requiring an area that's closed off to fight against opponents, because if they're basically fighting in an open area, this won't actually work. However, if Dagon can still manipulate the water and effectively have to manipulate the water and have it circulate constantly, while it will be harder to keep opponents trapped in, it will still be possible nonetheless. Furthermore, if he creates a Shikigami with that basic purpose in mind, where its only purpose is just to constantly circulate the water and make sure this water continues spinning, it's effectively taking the task off of himself and burden off of himself and onto that Shikigami, where they can also add a binding vow on top of that Shikigami, making it so its only ability is to do that, and thus the water spinning will spin even faster and help Dagon even more against opponents. Not even talking about more fine-tuned levels of control, such as creating massive water hands in order to hold opponents still, and keep them still while Dagon launches even more attacks on them, bombarding them, or water chains for that exact same purpose in order to throw opponents around. The advantage with water is the sky is the limit, because there are so many things you could actually do with water. Like, there's even the possibility of drowning people inside of the water that Dagon is manipulating as well, if Dagon's even able to get a little bit of the water inside of an opponent's system. And to add even more to that, to make it even harder to avoid the water, you can make it start to rain water, taking inspiration from storm clouds and rain clouds itself. Which, using a rain cloud is effectively like using a domain sure hit that will not miss. After all, I am pretty sure everyone has at least tried once in their life to avoid rain. You know how impossible that is, because it's absolutely impossible because of how much rain actually covers. And Dagon can just do this with even faster and more pressurized water. But that's just talking about the base level of shaping and controlling the water. Now we're going to talk about what should actually be possible through having access to water manipulation as a whole. Up first is just simply pressurizing the water, and I think you guys don't actually know how powerful pressurized water actually is, so let me explain to you how powerful pressurized water is. There are levels where if you pressurize the water enough on its own, it's capable of cutting through stone relatively easily as well, being known as something with the greatest amount of cutting power because of how pressurized it can be. However, if you amplify that with even more curse energy, it will make it even more potent, even faster as a result of that. So now imagine Dagon launching out a wave of water at an opponent that is highly pressurized, and imagine how hard it would be to even deal with that thanks to the amount of curse energy it would be infused into that. Such an attack like that would take off some limbs. Also, if you were to segregate a Shikigami with that purpose alone and basically have just two flying fish Shikigami just floating in the background firing out these high pressurized water waves, it would make it even more of a nightmare to actually have to fight against. Creating Shikigami with individual purposes like this is incredibly useful, especially for someone like Dagon, who has so many options of versatility as a fighter, where if he creates individual Shikigami that can handle each of those purposes, while at the same time he himself can do all and be a jack of all trades, he makes Shikigami that are incredibly potent in their one purpose, while being able to support them and adjust to any other fighting style at all. Furthermore, if Dagon wants to, through this pressurized water method, they can actually replicate something we've already seen be done in the manga before, which is when Sukuna simulated doing piercing blood but with water instead of blood, where effectively Dagon can do this too, but with water instead of blood, and take inspiration from Choso yet again. Furthermore, while using the water hand application that I talked about earlier, they can make several water hands just floating around that are each firing out their own piercing blood on top of that, because a flaw that Sukuna has that Dagon doesn't have is Sukuna can't really really manipulate the water like how Dagon can. So just imagine the nightmare of several piercing aquas just being fired at you from several different angles, while also having to deal with everything else we've already given to Dagon up to this point. However, we are not done yet. As up next, when you do research on how water works and the stages of water, you're able to find out quite a lot about what Dagon could potentially be capable of doing, such as evaporating his own water. If he is capable of controlling the temperature of his own water, which we don't fully know if he's capable of it or not, but he could be capable of it, so for the sake of this video, we're going to give Dagon the nod and assume that he is capable of controlling the temperature of his own water. He could be capable of a lot of things. One such thing he could be capable of is evaporating his water and making it so people breathe in the water he manipulates, and then after people breathe in that water, he can make that water re-manifest and effectively manipulate the water from inside their body. You know how I was talking about how Dagon could have a sure hit without a domain? This is a sure hit without a domain. After all, literally every single sorcerer needs to breathe other than Gojo, and even then, Gojo can only not breathe for a limited amount of time. He's going to need to breathe eventually, so this is going to work on basically everybody. Now, of course, there is a chance that Gojo might be able to tell, but that's still a pretty useful move considering it works on 99% of the verse, because a lot of the verse doesn't really have a way to counter this. Furthermore, they don't even have to breathe it in. Like, they can just make the evaporated water go in through one part of their body like their nose and just do it from there as well. Like, it's actually terrifying how useful evaporated water could actually be. Furthermore, Dagon could just make that water appear and manifest around a person, so he doesn't have to make it travel, and instead he can make it fill an entire area and then just have it reappear and disappear without giving people an opportunity to dodge it. It's because, like, even if you are aware of the fact that you are surrounded by evaporated water, purely because the evaporated water would have curse energy signatures from Dagon, even if you're aware of that, there's not really much you can do because you're stuck inside of that area to begin with. And Dagon can just create more. There's nothing stopping him from just making more and more of the evaporated water and then having that manifest on a person. It's like, oh, you're aware of it. Good luck dealing with this sure hit attack that's going to hit you no matter what you do, because it's going to spawn on your body. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Speaking of icebergs, what if it's possible for Dagon to manipulate the temperature of his water, thus being able to create ice? You know, basically becoming Urame 2.0, but instead of Urame needing to launch the ice out at opponents and actually manifest the ice as waves, they're able to use the evaporation method I talked about to have the water then manifest inside of people and then have that water immediately freeze inside of someone. Because, like, dealing with the water being formed inside of you is somewhat possible to deal with. Dealing with a giant hunk of ice block formed inside of you is not as easy to deal with, if not near impossible to deal with it near immediately. But it is something that would make Dagon even more dangerous, assuming it is possible for him to manipulate ice like that. Furthermore, it would give Dagon an even more solid suit of armor in comparison to the water manipulation, where he can stack both the water armor we talked about beforehand with the ice armor as well to make it even harder to reach Dagon, or he can launch out ice spikes at people, going full on Pokemon, being able to change the area itself to cover it in ice to make it even harder to move around, while also having to deal with the issue of the water. Using ice walls to also make closed off barriers where he doesn't even need to summon up his domain in order to trap people inside of the water column that we talked about beforehand, while having ice just circulate inside of the water and people getting hit and bombarded with ice inside of the water. Furthermore, like beforehand, creating a Shikigami where their Shikigami's only purpose is to launch out ice at opponents in order to have extra support for Dagon is something that should be very, very possible. On top of that, Dagon can coat each of his Shikigami in ice as an extra layer of additional sharpness and power and defense for them to make them even harder to deal with. Dagon can even set up little backup traps inside the Shikigami where if the Shikigami are destroyed, a bomb of ice ends up erupting in them, resulting in either ice shards being launched out or giant ice spikes being launched out to catch opponents off guard even more. However, that's just one side of temperature. There's another side of temperature we can go to. What if it's possible for him to heat up the water instead, which would allow him to do things like make incredibly scalding water, which would burn to touch on top of already having high amounts of pressure, which would make his attacks have even more potency, which we're going to save the scalding water for the domain section of this video. On top of that, he can also create large amounts of steam. This steam could effectively be used to catch people off guard, to hide his appearance, because effectively everywhere feels like him. Everywhere feels like Dagon, and thus it'd be impossible to sense him because Dagon would basically be everywhere. Same with his Shikigami. It can also make fighting alongside other people be incredibly difficult, because imagine that you have to launch out attacks, but at the same time, if you're fighting with your own teammate, there's a potential chance that you might end up hurting them in the process, or you have to stay with your teammate the entire time, which removes a massive amount of mobility from a lot of fighters. while at the same time, Dagon has the full ability to just sense through everything, see through everything, and continue to attack people in the process and constantly, completely bombard them with attacks, making fighting Dagon an absolute nightmare through this ability. However, that's just going off of basic water manipulation. Now we're going to move on to everything he should have access to as the fear of the ocean. Because as I talked about in the beginning of the video, Dagon is not the fear of water. Dagon is the fear of the ocean and the creatures that exist in the ocean. Furthermore, we already see that through the Shikigami that Dagon can create fish like Shikigami, which is when we're going to go extreme in terms of both fish based in the ocean itself and legends that are based on the ocean, and give these both to Dagon. After a while, Dagon does use a massive variety of fish. There are still some better fish he can use. For example, the electric eel. This is mainly because of the electric eel's ability to deliver shocks to people, which would be even more useful considering we already see how effective lightning actually is in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. After all, Kashimo for a long time's entire fighting style was based around lightning. He was still considered one of the top tiers despite only having lightning manipulation through his cursed energy trait, but now we're giving that to one of the Shikigami. But on top of that, we could also potentially give this to Dagon himself since he is based on the fear of the ocean, which would allow him to deliver lightning-based attacks. Furthermore, it would make his water attacks that much more dangerous because he could infuse the water with lightning and have the lightning travel through the water, which would be even more of a nightmare and even worse for people fighting him. Basically pulling off what Megumi did against Kamo in their one fight, where he used Elephant and then he used Nue together, but Dagon could do that repeatedly. There are also several other poisonous fish which will make it poisonous to even touch Dagon, assuming he can add these traits to himself, such as the stingray or a puffer fish, which will make touching him that much worse. Either that or infusing it into Shikigami as well, in order to add even more levels of danger to it, where if the Shikigami are able to land a hit on opponents, it would make it even more likely the opponent ends up getting poisoned, which would make the domain an absolute nightmare, because it's effectively guaranteed poison to hit you. If we do even more research on potential fish that Dagon can use as Shikigami, we come up with the Blue Dragon Sea Slug, otherwise known as the Blue Gallicus, which this thing is a monster. If you've ever seen it in a YouTube short, you know what it is. If you haven't, then I'm about to explain to you one of the greatest slugs that have ever existed and one of the most evil things that have existed. This is a slug that is able to cause a venom onto a person that once they are stung, it feels like an extremely sharp pain all across your body, which can also cause things like disorientation as well and make it even harder to live. These are extremely poisonous creatures, which on a real note, avoid these things. If you really want to go the full ocean fear aesthetic thing, take advantage of the massive amounts of diseases that exist in the ocean and use those as attacks as well, which I'm not going to focus on too long purely because I don't feel like researching those in particular. However, there is a lot of diseases in the ocean. The ocean is a very scary place. Another fish that could be extremely useful for Dagon to add to his arsenal of Shikigami are Shikigami based around stonefishes, which is by far and away the most venomous known fish on the planet, with extremely fatal stings to humans, just to add even more damage in the sure hit included in Dagon's domain. You see, this is the power of what happens when you go past just generic fish and you actually start to research what types of dangerous fish exist. Because there are so many dangerous fish that I'm not even touching the surface of this. And it is absolutely insane. And we're not done yet, because we're about to go with fictional creatures that might also exist as well. Now, this is going to be by far and away the biggest stretch, saying Dagon is able to create Shikigami based around mythological beasts that people fear come from the ocean. But I want to include it nonetheless because this is my video. If you don't like it, then oh well. Now, the first one I had in mind was the Kraken for obvious reasons. It's the Kraken. Like, the Kraken wouldn't even really have any special powers, is the funny thing either. It's just like a giant Shikigami based on the Kraken. Like, just imagine the fear that would go into the opponent's eyes if they had to fight it. So, let me have some fun. The second one is the much more important, but also much more pushy one of the two of them. Which the second one I have in mind is the Sirens. If you know what the Sirens are from mythology, then you know. For people who don't know, the Sirens are able to sing, and when they sing, they're able to hypnotize people and effectively control their mind and make them go into their water, basically drowning them. So I think you can see where I'm going with this entire ability. However, this one is not an absolute necessity for everything we've already given to Dagon, as now we're finally going to focus on his domain now that we've gotten the Shikigami type out of the way. Where the main thing we're going to do for Dagon's domain is, instead of there actually being an island, we're just going to make it straight up an ocean. Of course, Dagon is going to have the option of whether he wants to be an island or not, but I think it would be good to make the island optional and not mandatory for Dagon's domain expansion. So while they have to deal with Shikigami constantly biting at them, they also have to deal with the fact that they cannot breathe, while also having to deal with the fact that Dagon Dagon is still going to fight them while being amped inside of the domain. However, there are even further ways you can increase this. We're going to make it so the water inside of the domain is scalding hot. So not just are you going to have to deal with the water being extremely hot inside of the domain, but also the Shikigami, which some of them are going to be extremely poisonous, while some are also going to be lightning based, and then also Dagon fighting you at the same time and launching ice-based attacks at you, just you repeatedly getting bombarded and dying to attacks. Now, this is not going to make Dagon the strongest in the verse by a long shot. However, with everything we've given to Dagon, I think he could easily enter into the category and discussion for being the top 5 of JJK. So yeah, that's what we're going to give to Dagon, and now we're going to move on to the next cursed spirit, Jogo. And now we're in the finale that you've all been waiting for of the Disaster Curses. The final member of the Elemental Trio and the wielder of fire and magma, the embodiment of humanity's fear over the volcanoes and lava, Jogo himself. Now, Jogo is going to be a lot harder to advance in comparison to Dagon and Hanami, mainly because of the fact that Jogo, we've kind of seen a lot from him by this point. Like, he doesn't suffer from either of their issues, but we have actually seen Jogo's domain expansion and how that functions, but we've also seen a lot of what Jogo can do. However, there are still things I can do. After all, as you can see, Jogo still has a pretty lengthy chunk of this video. So before we do go into how we can advance Jogo's moveset, we have to go over Jogo's big, hefty moveset. Now, we are going to also be giving everything Jogo did in the anime to manga Jogo, purely because of the fact that everything Jogo did pull off in the anime, he should be capable of pulling off in the manga. There's not really anything he does in the anime that should be out of the ordinary and impossible for Jogo to do. So let's get into this. Jogo's technique is known as the Disaster Flames, where Jogo has access to a volcanic innate ability that allows him to use things like fire manipulation, magma manipulation, make small little volcanoes rise out for him to use concentrated heat beams against opponents, create small little Shikigami known as the Ember Insects, which are able to produce a large noise, as well as make a massive lava explosion. He can make giant magma hands, fill entire areas with lava, fire out a lava beam from his head, and fire out magma like a machine gun at opponents, easily having one of the best speeds in JJK. Jogo has a lot of good things going for him, though he does have the drawback of having one of the worst durabilities in all of JJK as well, but he does have a lot of good things going for him, so we're going to advance Jogo starting from that. Yeah, that's right, we're starting from Jogo's durability, mainly because why not just get his main weakness out of the way first before we get to actually advancing his entire kit, being his durability. Now, I've been trying to push a message for the longest time for a lot of people. Jogo's main defense is his speed, but that comes to an issue where if he's fighting against someone who is similar to him in terms of speed levels, then Jogo is pretty bad in terms of the combat. Jogo's not that durable at all, being much less durable than Hanami, who Hanami is able to get hurt by Goodwill Yuji punches. So we're going to have 2 ways around Jogo in order to help him out, in order to make him even better for this type of combat. The main reason I think this is important to understand is because Jogo's main instinct most of the time is close quarters. Every single time Jogo has started a fight, he immediately went for close quarters combat. He didn't actually start using his ranged, which while of course using ranged spam is very useful, we are going to make sure that Jogo is covered in terms of this aspect too. So up first, we're going to make a 2-layered suit of armor for Jogo to wear, in inspiration from Mahito's true form. However, it's not going to be the same as Mahito's true form, but it will still be somewhat similar in inspiration. But the first layer is effectively going to be molten rock, mainly made in order to amplify Jogo's durability. Mainly because if we do use Jogo's magma and Jogo's attacks as instead a method for shielding Jogo's body, it should help his durability even more. Stack that on top of the fact that any damage he does end up taking, he can end up healing off and just doing repairs to his armor midway. But he's going to have a second layer of armor on top of that, where while this one was made purely for defense, the second layer is more so made for offense, where they are coated in magma, basically making it even harder to touch Jogo, because you're literally touching magma if you're trying to fight him. And it also makes Jogo's hand-to-hand combat moves have even more of an impact and hit to it. And then a second method we can use is effectively Jogo using his fire to propel himself, even though this seems to be a strategy he already uses in the anime. Speaking of, we're already in close quarters combat, so Jogo can create extra arms made out of magma. These extra arms can assist him even more. After all, we see in the manga how useful having 4 arms can actually be. So imagine having several arms made of magma that you can have assisting you. So while you can have your original arms chanting, you can have the lava arms continue to fight, but at the same time getting output amps because you're constantly chanting. Furthermore, you can also create extra Shikigami in order to assist you in fighting, effectively turning every fight from a 1-on-1 to a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1, making them made out of molten rock or them out of lava itself in order to make it even harder to hit them. Like, imagine 3 Jogos running at a person and lighting them on fire while also landing hand-to-hand hits and having to deal with that on all sides. and one of them being made out of magma, which should make it even harder to deal with, while also having to deal with a giant fire hand coming at you, or just giant fire attacks in the process, or just Jogo having like 3 Shikigami fighting you in hand-to-hand, while at the same time Jogo's preparing some ranged attacks. However, that's just the start of it. After all, what is something else that fire produces? Smoke. Smoke is very useful in this type of situation because of how dangerous smoke actually is. For one, people have to put on masks in smoke fields for a reason, because breathing in smoke is very, very dangerous to people, but two, and more importantly, it would completely cover Jogo's view. So not just are people breathing in smoke constantly thanks to Jogo, they're also going to have to deal with the fact that they can no longer sense Jogo, while also getting jumped, and dealing with massive amount of magma attacks coming at them as well. And I'm just getting started with this, because that's mainly just for close quarters types of combat. After all, there's something else Jogo can do, which is overflood an entire area with magma, which is something he can do in the canon of the anime, but another thing he can do is effectively create a giant magma dome to keep the magma inside of, and then immediately cool that magma off and start to fill the dome on some Kisame type energy, where instead of using it with water, he's using it with magma. So while you're stuck inside of the orb, you're melting away and having to deal with the fact you're completely surrounded in lava, which is extremely hard to escape from. While you're stuck inside of the lava, there's also the potential that Jogo could just fire a bunch of beams at you and continue to put pressure on you while continuing to attack you, like a fish that spotted its prey, mainly because he's not going to be hindered by the fact he's in lava, unlike his opponent, who's going to be in constant amount of pain because they're surrounded by lava, if not already melted away, which just adds even more pressure to what Jogo can do. To add even more to this, Jogo can just manifest a large amount of fireballs in the air and just have them bombard people, making it that much harder to avoid the attack when they're firing at a range in order to put even more pressure on opponents, all the while limiting their options for where they can dodge as well by having lava pillars rise out at the same time that these fireballs are just being launched down, massively limiting their options, if not forcing them to get hit by both of these types of attacks at the same time, filling the area with a massive amount of heat, where even if they do manage to avoid both of these attacks, they're going to have to deal with the massive amount of heat that is produced, as well as the massive amount of smoke that is also going to be produced that they're going to be breathing in this entire time. The smoke is by far and away the most dangerous aspect of this. Jogo has also shown off the ability to light things on fire that are nearby him enough by igniting the air on them. So why not just expand the range of that massively by heating up the air of an entire area around you? Now this would probably take a lot more curse energy in comparison to the casual thing he did to that one guy in a restaurant, but if he's able to do that, that would be even better. Especially considering the fact Jogo has a massive amount of curse energy, because we saw how much he is capable of using in his battle against Sukuna in both the anime and the manga. So Jogo has a massive well of curse energy, so effectively doing this as a sure hit without a sure hit would be insanely impressive, while the opponents are also going to have to deal with the fact they're now breathing in even more of the smoke, which is going to be harder to heal off. To talk about Maximum Meteor for a second, because I feel Maximum Meteor should also be talked about, there are things that Jogo can do in order to make it so people are far less likely to dodge Maximum Meteor. Because a massive issue with Maximum Meteor is incredibly slow. No matter how you look at Maximum Meteor, it is still very, very slow as an attack. So another method you could do is surrounding someone in lava beforehand, quickly cooling off that lava in order to put them inside of a box, and then having Maximum Meteor form. So while they're focused on trying to get out of the box, at the same time, you have the Maximum Meteor come down and attempt to hit them. It would be even worse if they had to deal with the fact the box is filled with smoke, causing them to have to cough repeatedly while trying to break out the box, unknown to them that the maximum attack is coming at them, something capable of damaging Sukuna. Speaking of Maximum Meteor, rather than actually creating a massive meteor, why not create several smaller meteors that would move down at an even faster pace against an opponent in order to make it so they have even more attacks to have to deal with. Just like an entire meteor storm that they're going to have to deal with, while also having to deal with the fact the ground is basically being replaced with magma. If you guys can't tell what I'm trying to do right now, the main thing we're trying to do is massively overwhelm opponents with too many attacks down to the point where they won't be able to counter because there are just too many things coming at them and they're guaranteed to get hit by these overpowered attacks. After all, that is Jogo's main fighting style. Jogo's main fighting style is to overwhelm someone with so many attacks while taking advantage of his speed down to the point where they don't have a chance at all to counterattack. Which is when we're going to get into more creation of more specific types of Shikigami, basically applying each of the new variations of his technique as well as the old variations of things Jogo can use to each and every single Shikigami and limiting them so they can only use that ability. In theory, Jogo could create a fireball-based Shikigami, which is able to fire out long-range fireballs, or while Jogo and his other Shikigami that are more made for close-range combat are going up against someone. These long-range fireballs will be much more powerful though, mainly because of the fact that this Shikigami is only limited to the fireball application. This can be done with a numerous amount of the Shikigami in a numerous amount of ways in order to amp their power even more, effectively making each of the Shikigami just a single card ability. Each of the Shikigami are a one-trick pony in comparison to Jogo, who is going to be the jack of all trades, the one who's able to use all of the techniques while getting support from his Shikigami that are only able to use several techniques, but we're not even done yet. We still have other ways we can amplify Jogo even more based on his abilities. After all, up to this point we have been mainly focusing on keeping Jogo within his style, but now we're going to focus on some other ways to get Jogo out of his style but to cover his abilities. Which this is when we're going to focus more on defenses, because while the armor is going to be very helpful for Jogo, there are better ways to shield himself where he's not even at risk of getting hit through the armor itself. After all, there are some attacks that are guaranteed to hit you even going past the armor, which that is a problem. So the first thing I have in mind in order to help Jogo out is to basically create a defense-based application of his technique, where this technique effectively makes a large amount of lava rise out before that lava immediately hardens, turning to very hard rock, which as a result is not actually able to hurt anybody. However, it's able to block attacks much better, basically creating a massive stone wall for Jogo in case he actually ends up with an attack that would normally destroy his armor, basically as backup. Another method is effectively creating what is a lava clone to take the hit for you, taking inspiration from Naruto for that one, where a lava clone of themselves is launched out, taking the hit beforehand and exploding, resulting in Jogo being launched back, as well as the opponent also taking more damage from it. However, we've mainly been focusing on Jogo's close range style as well as his fire. Now we're going to move on to his telepathic volcanoes. The telepathic volcanoes are a very useful thing that Jogo has access to because of the ability to just make volcanoes rise out from anywhere to use, which this is something we're going to have Jogo use a lot more because this is a very useful ability. But rather than them just firing out wads of lava, we are also going to have them fire out smoke from time to time, using them effectively smoke screens like beforehand, where instead of Jogo having to create the smoke screen himself, now we can have the volcanoes create smoke screens instead, making it even easier for him to get opponents trapped inside of the smoke. Furthermore, also use these volcanoes as a method to make sure you have all of your angles covered. Like if someone comes at Jogo from behind, after everything we've already given to Jogo, then have the volcanoes rise out from behind them, or have volcanoes constantly around Jogo's body 24/7, basically making reaching Jogo impossible. Or if Jogo misses in his kill and they're about to go for a behind back strike, well, a volcano now rises out from Jogo's back, or congrats, you're now hit in the head by a volcano. GG no re. Speaking of, why not cover the battlefield in these volcanoes? Get one all across the wall. Make sure there are constantly at least a few around. Don't just unsummon them the moment they land a hit on someone, because no matter how you slice it, these volcanoes are always going to be useful. At worst case scenario, they're going to be something that the opponent has to constantly look out for and be on their toes about, while also having to deal with the massive amount of things that Jogo can throw at them at this point. Up next, we're going to take some inspiration from Choso and how he uses blood manipulation, because the way that Choso uses blood manipulation is effectively by filling an area with blood, and then after he fills the area with blood, he repeatedly utilizes that blood instead of just creating more and more blood. While yes, Jogo has a lot of curse energy and can fill a lot of an area with lava, why not just manipulate that lava to constantly have it rushing at a person, rather than having to create more and more lava and just leaving that one on the ground to melt away at everything? After all, doing that would make Jogo a significantly more dangerous threat, and now he does do this in the anime when he makes those giant lava hands by manipulating the lava, showing that he's fully capable of it, as well as trying to trap Sukuna inside the lava. He chooses to stop after that point and never do so again. Which, granted, I'm saying that like he lived after that fight, but he never did it against another opponent like Gojo. Granted, we did only see Jogo fight 2 times, technically 3 times, but those people were basically near dead, where he fought against Gojo and he fought against Sukuna, and he couldn't really do much against them other than show what he had. But yeah, there's still more he could have done, so for all we know he can do this, we don't know. Finally, the last application I have in mind for Jogo is instead making lava rise through the ground and then rise up right underneath opponents, basically like a lava geyser rather than just firing the lava out directly at an opponent. Now, the reason why Jogo does have one of the shorter sections in this video is not actually because he has low amounts of potential. No, the issue I have with Jogo is we see a lot of what he can do in the anime. The anime really shows off a lot of what Jogo's capabilities are and why Jogo is one of the strongest curses we have seen, which made coming up with new applications for Jogo somewhat difficult. Now, I still ended up doing it, as you guys can see, but it was still a very difficult task. However, we're not done yet, because there's one more aspect of Jogo we have left to cover, which that final aspect is Jogo's domain expansion. Now, you might be wondering, how are we going to improve Jogo's domain expansion? Well, there's one issue I have with it is, we don't know what his sure hit is, and I'm not going to alter that because we really don't know what his sure hit is, other than like maybe making it maximum meteor, but we don't really know. However, what I am going to do for Jogo's domain expansion is make one tiny small edit. Make the entire floor lava. I don't know why Jogo gave people room to stand on inside of the domain. Just make the entire floor lava, make it so there's not a single place that no one can stand on, because then people are both dealing with the sure hit while also having to swim in lava. Now, I was about to end the video, but I actually came up with one final attack idea before I end up ending the video with Jogo. Which that long-range attack idea is basically a fireball, however this fireball is only working at a long range. But the longer the fireball goes, the more and more the wind going past it naturally fans the flame. Which as a result, that fireball gets much more potent and much more powerful in the process. Basically think of it as taking inspiration from Sukuna's massive fire arrow, because that thing is massive, as we saw how much damage it was actually capable of doing to Shibuya in both the manga and especially the anime. But that's about everything that I could come up with for these free disaster curses and their full potential. Now I want to see what you guys come up with in the comment section down below, your potential ideas for how to advance their abilities even more, because I feel like I was missing some things for some of them, but I can't really think of them at the top of my head right now. I'm gonna see you all later. Hope you all have a good day and a good night. Goodbye. Blood manipulation is one of by far the most explored curse techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen, however even I don't feel it's been properly fully explored, despite blood manipulation also being the technique we have seen that has the most actual users of it, because blood manipulation we have seen a total of 4 users of it. I think it's 4 currently. Oh wait, no, 5 counting Kenjaku, but we haven't actually seen Kenjaku use it. Anyways, that's beside the point. With blood manipulation having a total of 4 seen users of it, it is by far and away one of the most explored techniques. However, I believe it is a technique that can be explored and advanced even further, which is going to be the point of this video. Because in this video, I would like to discuss both blood manipulation, everything we've already seen blood manipulation do, as well as how to advance blood manipulation even further, as well as how to make it achieve its full power. But before we even get into this video, be sure to like and subscribe to anime content like this, and let's get into this. However, before we even get into this video is sponsored by Fandomio, and this is especially time I recommend you get, like, if you ever wanted anime merch, now would be the time, because they have a pre-Black Friday sale going on, where you get 50% off everything, plus my own discount code that I'm going to hook y'all up for an extra 10% off, and they're going to have a lot more codes, so I'm going to be talking about them quite a bit more often, but now is the better time than any if you want to help out the channel and get your own anime merch, either for Black Friday or for Christmas in advance. Go check out the link to Fandomio in the comment section below. I really recommend them. They have some really epic merch, and let's get back into the videos. Now, up first, I am going to go over why I'm even doing this, and I think just blood manipulation is by far and away one of the best techniques with one of the greatest amounts of potential we have seen in Jujutsu Kaisen. This is purely due to the fact that, like, blood manipulation is from one of the big furry family heads, directly compared to the likes of the Gojo clan head, as well as the Zenin clan head. And with the comparison between Kamo and Megumi that Kamo directly makes, I feel blood manipulation has a lot of potential, so I wanted to take this time to explore blood manipulation, the already existing techniques, and figure out if we could create more techniques, or if we can advance the already existing techniques to make them even more powerful within the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, this will not be a blood manipulation explained video. I'm not going to go in depth with every single one of the techniques. I'm only going to give a brief description of what they do. I'm not going to go in depth with the users of the techniques either as well. Mainly because in the future, I do really want to make a blood manipulation explained type video. This video is made to actually look at the already existing applications of blood manipulation and how to advance them further, as well as how to create new applications for blood manipulation as a technique and how to advance that and how to make it truly reach its pinnacle. However, before we even get into applications, let's look at the base technique itself and how it functions. The base technique of blood manipulation is about manipulating your own blood within and outside of your body. However, based on what we know, it must be your own blood. And as a result of that, blood manipulation users are usually limited in how much blood they can create, because humans only have so much blood they are actually able to utilize. However, there have been shown to be other ways to get around this drawback. For example, if you are a cursed wound painting, you're able to turn your own cursed energy into blood. It's why Choso never runs out of blood. And if you're Kamo was able to drain his own blood into several blood packs in order to give himself additional blood for him to use alongside the blood in his body. However, blood manipulation users do have one more weakness, which is the fact that their blood dissolves much easier in water, making it much harder for them to use blood manipulation outside of their body in water without actually directly covering the blood itself that they are going to manipulate. For the sake of this video, we're not going to assume our user of blood manipulation is a cursed womb painting like Choso is. Instead, we're going to assume they're human like Kamo Noritoshi. However, there is an extremely easy way to get around the weakness of blood manipulation of humans not having enough blood, which is reverse curse technique and healing off your body. And considering the levels that we have seen people be capable of healing with reverse curse technique, especially if this is a fully mastered user of it, it should be very possible for them to overcome this weakness and get practical experience all the time, because they would have to constantly use reverse curse technique in order to restore themselves and their weapons. And now we're going to talk about the weakness that blood manipulation users directly have to water and how to overcome this, which that weakness is a lot harder to directly overcome. Thankfully, it's much less rare you're going to have to fight this, considering there were literally only 2 users of water manipulation throughout the entire series, which is Megumi through his elephant, as well as Dagon as a cursed spirit. But that's not good enough for us, because we want to make sure we can fight all of them as our maxed out blood manipulation user. So, the way that I, as a blood manipulation user, would get over the weakness of water is simply by shielding the water by creating a Shikigami that the blood itself is contained in and charged for attacks to be released onto people. Now, the applications of the Shikigami I'm going to talk a lot more about later into this video, but first I just want to directly discuss how this is going to be used to overcome the weakness blood manipulation directly has. Because blood manipulation is extremely weak to water, they can use Shikigami as shells for the blood manipulation directly, as techniques are prepared inside of the Shikigami themselves in order to launch out as opponents. We also know that it's possible for anybody to create a Shikigami, but not all of them are created the same or have the same properties. So it's going to be extremely useful for the specific Shikigami with blood manipulation. We do also know it is possible to use your curse technique alongside the Shikigami, as seen with Yuki. This also could be utilized to get over the first weakness of not being able to contain enough blood within the body, because if you prep Shikigami enough to contain your own blood and store it ahead of time, then you are overcoming the weakness because you're going to have extra blood to utilize through the Shikigami. For example, you could just have one really massive Shikigami in the background that's entire purpose is just to carry out blood, because you yourself are not able to carry that much blood on you normally, but the Shikigami is able to carry that much blood. Now, while there are a total of 9 applications of blood manipulation, I'm only going to be looking at a total of 4 of them and how to advance them, because those are the 4 that can be improved upon the most, which those 4 that I am going to look at are Flowing Red Scale, Slicing Exorcism, Piercing Blood, and Supernova. What I'd also consider the 4 most powerful applications of blood manipulation as well, and the 4 that cover all ranges. The first and easiest that I'm going to talk about is Slicing Exorcism, which Slicing Exorcism is a long-range based attack that allows the user to slice at their opponent as well as being in 2 different forms. The way that Kamo uses it as a disc of blood that he literally throws at Hanami, and the way that Choso uses it is several long streams of blood in order to attack people and cut people with that attack during the Shibuya incident arc. Now, the way to advance this technique is actually using both of these applications at the same time, rather than only focusing on one. What do I mean by that? Well, use the long streams of blood that Choso usually uses with this technique rather to wrap around a person and throw them up in the air and then hit them with the slicing disc variation of the technique in order to bombard them while they're in the air, mostly because 99% of the characters within Jujutsu Kaisen don't have a way to get around actually being in the air and were forced to basically take hits while they're in the air. However, that is only just a tactic to evolve the technique. The way I'd actually evolve this technique is by taking advantage of Choso's application, where Choso's application is around creating long streams of blood. This is where a binding vow should be placed on this particular application, where the blood becomes much thinner, but by extension, its cutting power becomes much, much grander, basically creating a pseudo-cleave in a way. However, there would be the obvious drawback of, due to the technique being much thinner, it's much clearer to see and much easier to evade because it has much less of an attack range that it can generally hit. But in exchange for that, it would likely gain a tremendous buff because of the drawback that it's placed on the technique itself. This could especially be used well with attacks made to catch people off guard, especially with its newly enhanced cutting power that's going to be delivered with this binding vow amped towards it. Now, the next technique I would like to talk about is Piercing Blood. Now, Piercing Blood is also difficult in its own right to advance. However, there are some ways you can advance it to make it even better and even more useful for combat. Which the way Piercing Blood works is after you use Convergence, which Convergence compresses and condenses the blood to its limits, it's then transformed into a blood beam that's able to reach the speed of sound in order to try and blitz opponents with an incredibly powerful attack. Now, Piercing Blood does have one incredibly large weakness, which is the fact that if you're able to dodge the initial Piercing Blood, you are able to pretty easily dodge the rest of the attack because only the initial strike that it's being launched at is at the speed of sound, and the rest of it is quite slower. Now, there are about two ways that I can see to overcome this weakness, which the first way is by creating a larger beam, and the second way is when you fire off a Piercing Blood, several Piercing Bloods are fired in the process of that first Piercing Blood in order to make it much harder to dodge, both being used with a binding vow, which makes it require a longer charge time and much more blood to be condensed into it as a result of that, leaving the opponent much more open. Which, you guys are likely going to say this is not Dragon Ball. People aren't going to let characters charge attacks, which I do agree with. However, I already thought of that. Because remember when I talked about Shikigami being useful in the beginning of the video? This is where Shikigami are going to come in, and this is something I feel is extremely underrated about Shikigami and how they're used in combat, because they are really not used as much as they should be. It'd be an extremely good idea to just have a Shikigami in the background charging this new variant of Piercing Blood, while the blood manipulation user themselves is directly fighting against the opponent and keeping them distracted. Like, even if you don't think this is possible to create several beams through one Piercing Blood, it would still be very possible to use the Shikigami itself and just have like a bunch of Shikigami on standby charging up their own Piercing Bloods that all immediately launch at the speed of sound at an opponent. We'll talk about just one Shikigami being there to assist against Choso and how massive of a buff that would be, let alone 2 or 3, that you could have a drawback on the Shikigami be that they are not extremely durable in exchange for that. Like having Shikigami that can directly assist you in combat, utilize their own curse technique or your curse technique while allowing to assist you in combat makes a world of a difference. After all, one of the biggest advantage Yuta has is the fact that every fight against him is a 2v1. Now imagine a Shikigami that's just charging up a Piercing Blood in the background as you are directly fighting a blood manipulation user, and then suddenly you feel that you're hit by an attack that's moving at the speed of sound in order to directly go through your flesh. Now on a side note, I'm imagining that the Shikigami is shaped like a dragonfly. I just want to put that out there. I don't know why I'm imagining it's shaped like a dragonfly, but I'm just like imagining out the dragonfly's mouth, a Piercing Blood is fired immediately at an opponent. Now the next technique I would like to focus on is Supernova before we get on to the final technique of Flowing Red Scale, which Supernova is using Convergence to create multiple small orbs of blood. The user has the orbs then shoot out in every direction like a buckshot. Basically, it was invented by Cho to be a catch-off-guard blood bomb type of technique that creates a semi-small explosion using Convergence on an opponent that also causes a decent amount of damage in the process. Now this technique in nature is already incredibly good. I don't see an actual way to advance this technique. However, I do see a way to actually advance the utilization of this techniques and tactics that can be done through Supernova because of how useful it is as a technique. And that is literally just by using it with other techniques more often, because it is such a useful technique that could be used to catch people off guard, because Choso already uses this to trap people. But imagine if he were to fire off a Piercing Blood, where after the Piercing Blood is fired, around the beams itself of the Piercing Blood, when someone's trying to run at Choso, a Supernova activates and explodes on them. Or when he is using Slicing Exorcism, around the Slicing Exorcism could be these Supernovas that are ready to explode and blind a person before slicing them. There are just so many ways to use Supernova, and it should be used alongside the techniques as extra support and extra damage in order to cause even more damage to an opponent. Even in hand-to-hand, he can use it more often, where when he directly rushes someone from hand-to-hand and they're about to jump back to avoid him, he just makes a supernova right out to explode on them, or he makes them explode when he's directly clashing fists with someone. There's just so many circumstances where supernova could be much more useful as a support-type technique. And now finally, I'm going to move on to Flowing Blood Scale, which is by far and away the one I have the most ideas for how to improve. The way the Flowing Blood Red Scale functions is by increasing the user's body temperature, pulse rate, and the number of red blood cells in order to give them a massive amount of boost in both energy and physical capabilities. Now, it's this state I truly believe give blood manipulation by far and away the most abilities that they can utilize, which we're going to get into now for first how to advance Flowing Red Scale, and then my own custom applications I'm going to take based on what we know is capable to do with blood manipulation. Now, the first of Flowing Red Scale variants that I came up with is based on the fact that with Flowing Red Scale, you're able to alter your body's temperature, which I like to call Flowing Red Scale Overheat, where by touching a user of Flowing Red Scale, you end up getting yourself extremely burned. Basically utilizing your body temperature to your advantage to make yourself massively hotter, so when people touch you, they take extra damage on top of the damage you're already going to be delivering to them. Like, basically imagine you're getting punched by a pan that's just been set on to full heat. That is what I'm imagining right now is happening to the opponent. Or more accurately, imagine you're in the presence of Jogo. I don't think they'd be as hot as Jogo, but it would still be enough to damage an opponent nonetheless. Now, the next variants of Flowing Red Scale are all going to be reliant on binding vows and specific binding vows made in order to make the actual results of the transformation much more powerful. Where basically all of these are going to be similar to the gates from Naruto if you have ever watched Naruto, where each of them are going to have much more physical drain on the body themselves, with the strongest variant of Flowing Red Scale being one that will take out the user themselves, but will also provide the most massive boost. However, RCT is going to be able to help a lot because I feel like some of them are just going to be mainly just like there to drain someone heavily. But either way, this would heavily amp a blood manipulation's hand-to-hand ability even further, considering the massive boost it already gives you normally. Because with Flowing Red Scale, Choso was able to keep up with Yuji, who Choso normally would take massive damage from Yuji in just 3 hits, but Flowing Red Scale was able to help him even further. Like, there could be one where after you use it, you're physically exhausted and unable to move for the rest of the battle until you heal yourself, which was where RCT could come in handy, as well as having several Shikigami that can assist you in combat, as well as one where you have to sacrifice your life, one where if you use it for a certain amount of time, you'll end up dying, but you can still have a chance to live, etc. It depends on how risky and how playful you want to be with Binding Vows, and Binding Vows, I just want to say, I feel like are one of the most underutilized things in Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole, considering how much power it can actually provide you. If you want to check out more and learn out more about Binding Vows, I do have an entire video going over everything we know about Binding Vows and how they are used in the series of Jujutsu Kaisen. So I really recommend checking that out after you're done here. But yeah, Binding Vows are just something that really should be utilized, especially with something like blood manipulation, which blood manipulation is already an extremely risky art on the body itself. So it seems perfect for Binding Vows because Binding Vows are a high risk, high reward type system, which even helps it even more to make this technique more and more powerful. Now I'm going to get into other applications that could be used with blood manipulation that honestly should be used, and there's no reason that these can't exist. Mainly because what fun would this video be if we were just talking about how to advance the already existing variants of blood manipulation? Because while that's all good and dandy, there are ways to advance what's already existing and create the new, which there are several new applications that could work extremely well with blood manipulation, and that I got inspiration from Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, the first technique that should be able to be done by any blood manipulation user is what I like to call blood machine gun, where, yeah, it's pretty obvious, it's just shooting out massive pellets of blood towards an opponent. However, there's a lot more to it than that. After the pellets are shot out in rapid succession, and assuming the opponent dodges, the user can then manipulate those blood pellets in order to either launch them back towards the user themselves or launch them towards the opponent as they continue to try and run, and just surround them with constant amount of projectiles that are constantly flying at them. Furthermore, if they manipulate the temperature of it, they'll be able to increase the heat of it even more, while Shikigami in the background prepares a piercing blood arrow. Another application that's more spells for trap reasons is a blood puddle, where you leave puddles of blood on the ground. Out from those puddles of blood, hands can grab or things can attach towards the opponent, which will either allow the user of blood manipulation to have slight alterations and manipulations of their body, or the ability to hold them still and force them to take hits. Now, another application that I thought of is entirely based on Korra if you've ever seen Kuvira fight, where Kuvira fights by placing small sheets of metal onto an opponent in order to direct their movements and have small control over their movements in battle. I can see a blood manipulation user doing the exact same thing by planting small amounts of blood onto an opponent and wrapping it around them in order to misdirect them repeatedly and land several hits on them. Basically, if you're a blood manipulation user, use it like water bending. Furthermore, I feel blood manipulation users should also take advantage of the temperature aspect of it more often, because the ability to land extra damage through burning people and landing hot based attacks on people because they can increase temperature, at least through the heat of the blood, is incredibly useful because of red scale and the fact that we know through red scale you can increase the body temperature nonetheless, and you can use RCT to potentially heal it, which is going to be a really huge thing that I think you guys have probably noticed throughout this video. For a blood manipulation user to reach its peak, they need to have reverse curse technique. However, I don't think that's really a surprise to any of you because most of the top tiers in Jujutsu Kaisen do actually have reverse curse technique and kinda need it. However, let's finally move on to the peak of Jujutsu, the thing that is going to be most needed for a blood manipulation sorcerer to truly reach their peak. What would a domain expansion look like for a blood manipulation user and a sure hit? Well, I have 3 ideas for how a blood manipulation type of domain could work, and I'm going to go from least dangerous to most dangerous. Now, the first idea I have for a domain is literally just blood manipulation plus, where the user summons a massive ocean of blood, and out from the ocean they're able to use blood manipulation and just use as much as they want without the drawback of needing it from their body. So they won't even need to use reverse curse technique anymore, and they can just spam any type of blood manipulation attack that they need to on an opponent. Now, this is an incredibly lethal domain, but it's not like a, oh, you're going to die 100% for sure if you're caught in this domain type of domain. Like, it's hard to fight back against, but it's still possible to fight back against. Hello everyone, I'm Future Eternal Flamey here, and I decided I'm just going to re-record this entire endpoint section of this video, primarily because copyright issues ended up happening with the video, making the original one have kinda crunchy audio, so hey, I'm just going to re-record the final ideas for the blood manipulation domain. Well, the second domain idea that we had in mind was effectively making a blood manipulation sure hit where it forces the opponent to not be able to move, kinda similar to what Naoya's domain does. However, the reason why it's going to hurt them instead is because by trying to move, their blood fights back against them, thus causing internal damage. Effectively, while they're trying to will their body to move one way, the blood is directly clashing against their body, thus doing damage to them internally. Which, while this is most certainly a lethal domain idea, it's not the most lethal out of the possible ones, as the most lethal one is the final option, where the final idea is effectively using blood manipulation on your opponent's body, thus controlling the body rather than just forcing them to stop moving. And this would allow you to do a lot of things to them. For example, you can force them to hurt themselves, or most of all, you can force their heart to stop. And against most domain users, if you're a human, this is a sure hit that you don't really have a way to fight back against and win. Now, this is still pretty good against curses as well, because we see with Mahito and Jogo that curses have blood, but at the same time, it's not going to be as effective as using it on a human. Because basically, against most human fighters, this is a basic way to end any and all fights. Though while this is the most lethal, this is the one I'm the least certain about being possible, but I felt it was worth including. However, that's about everything for blood manipulation. Hope you all have a good day. We'll see you all later. Peace out.